The Code on Wages, 2019, a landmark legislation enacted in the 70th year of the Republic of India that consolidates and amends existing wage-related laws, received presidential assent on August 8, 2019, replacing 4 previous labor laws: the Payment of Wages Act, 1936, Minimum Wages Act, 1948, Payment of Bonus Act, 1965, and Equal Remuneration Act, 1976, aims to ensure timely payment of wages, equal remuneration for all genders, and establish a universal minimum wage framework across all sectors throughout India, introduces simplified and transparent regulations to benefit approximately 500 million workers, while promoting ease of doing business for employers. Preliminary provisions. Short title: Extent and Commencement. This legislation shall be known as the Code on Wages, 2019. It applies throughout the entire territory of India, and shall become effective on the date officially designated by the central government. Definitions. The Code provides comprehensive definitions for key regulatory terms, including appropriate government employee-employer establishment wages, and other essential terminology necessary for proper interpretation and implementation of the legislation. Prohibition of discrimination on ground of gender. The Code explicitly prohibits any gender-based discrimination regarding wages within an establishment. Employers must ensure equal compensation for employees performing the same work, or work of a similar nature, regardless of gender. Minimum wages. Payment of minimum rate of wages. Every employer is obligated to pay wages not less than the minimum rate notified by the appropriate government to all employees. Fixation of minimum wages. The appropriate government shall establish minimum wage rates for both time-based and piece rate work, considering factors such as workers' skill levels and geographic variations across regions. Components of minimum wages. The structure of minimum wages may include a basic wage rate, with or without a cost of living allowance, and may incorporate the cash equivalent value of essential commodity concessions provided to workers. Floor wage. The central government shall establish a floor wage, based on minimum living standards of workers, below which no appropriate government may set their minimum wage rates, ensuring a baseline standard across the country. Payment of wages. The Code establishes comprehensive regulations governing wage payments. Mode of payment. Wages must be disbursed through current coin, currency notes, check, direct bank deposit to the employee's account, or other electronic payment methods. Wage period. Employers are required to establish a wage period, daily, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, that cannot exceed 1 month in duration. Time limit for payment. Regardless of the established wage period, employers must disburse wages within the legally prescribed timeframes to ensure timely compensation. Deductions. Any deductions from wages are strictly limited to statutorily specified purposes, and cannot exceed 50% of the employee's total wages in any single wage period. The Code establishes a comprehensive framework for bonus payments to eligible employees. Eligibility. Any employee earning wages below the notified threshold, who has worked for at least 30 days in an accounting year. Minimum bonus. 8.33% of wages, or 100, whichever is higher. Maximum bonus. 20% of wages, regardless of the allocable surplus. Proportionate calculation. When allocable surplus exceeds minimum bonus requirement, payment increases proportionately with wages earned up to the maximum. The bonus structure balances employee compensation rights with employer financial capabilities. When an employee qualifies for bonus payment, employers must calculate the appropriate amount based on the established percentages, with the minimum serving as a guaranteed floor, and the maximum as an absolute ceiling. Additional provisions address set-on and set-off mechanisms for allocable surplus, specific disqualification criteria, and special considerations for newly established businesses to ensure fair implementation across various operational contexts. Advisory Board. Central Advisory Board. The central government shall establish the Central Advisory Board comprising representatives of employers, representatives of employees, equal in number to employer representatives, independent members, not exceeding 1/3 of total board strength, 5 representatives from state governments to ensure diverse representation. 1/3 of all members must be women, and the chairperson position shall be filled by an independent member. State Advisory Board. Each state government is mandated to constitute a state advisory board mirroring the composition framework of the central board. State boards are empowered to form specialized committees or subcommittees to address specific issues requiring focused attention. Similar to the central board, 1/3 of state board members must be women, with an independent member serving as chairperson. These advisory boards play a crucial role in recommending policies for minimum wage fixation or revision, promoting increased employment opportunities for women, and providing expert guidance on various matters pertaining to the Code's implementation. Payment of dues. Claims and audit claims and determination. The appropriate government may appoint authorities to hear and determine claims under the code. Claims can be filed by employees, registered trade unions, or inspector cum facilitators within 3 years. Authorities may order compensation up to 10 times the claimed amount. Records and returns. Employers must maintain registers containing details of employees, muster rolls, and wages. Wage slips must be issued to all employees. Employers must display notices containing abstracts of the code and applicable wage rates. Audit of accounts. The code provides for auditing of employer accounts. Audits may be conducted specifically to verify and determine appropriate bonus payments. Enforcement and penalties. Penalties for offenses: underpayment of wages, fine up to 50,000, repeated underpayment within 5 years, imprisonment up to 3 months and/or fine up to 100,000. Other code violations: fine up to 20,000, repeated violations, imprisonment up to 1 month and/or fine up to 40,000. Record-keeping failures, fine up to 10,000. The code establishes inspector cum facilitators who serve dual roles, advising employers and workers on compliance requirements, while also conducting establishment inspections. These officials are empowered to examine individuals, request documentation, search premises, seize relevant records, and report compliance issues to the appropriate government authority. A gazetted officer may compound offenses for 50% of the maximum prescribed fine. Additionally, the code includes specific provisions addressing corporate offenses and provides safeguards for actions taken in good faith by implementing authorities. Code on Wages, Central Rules, 2020. On July 7, 2020, the Ministry of Labor and Employment issued an official notification regarding the draft rules proposed by the central government. These rules will be implemented under the authority granted by Section 67 of the Code on Wages, 2019-29 of 2019, in conjunction with Section 24 of the General Clauses Act 1897, 10 of 1897. The new regulations are designed to consolidate and replace multiple existing labor rules, streamlining wage-related compliance requirements across various sectors. Supersession of existing rules. Payment of wages rules. The Code on Wages, 2020 will supersede the Payment of Wages Procedure Rules, 1937, and Payment of Wages Nomination Rules, 2009, consolidating these provisions into a more comprehensive framework. Minimum Wages Rules. Both the Minimum Wages, Central Rules 1950 and Minimum Wages, Central Advisory Board Rules, 2011 will be replaced, streamlining wage determination procedures across sectors. Bonus and Remuneration Rules. The Payment of Bonus Rules, 1975, Equal Remuneration Rules, 1976, and Central Advisory Committee on Equal Remuneration Rules, 1991, will be integrated into the new Unified Code Compliance Framework. The ease of compliance to maintain register under various labor laws rules, 2017 will be superseded to the extent these rules were established under the previous labor acts, simplifying employer compliance requirements. Key definitions. Authority. The entity appointed by the central government under subsection 1 of Section 45 to implement and enforce wage regulations. Appellate authority. The higher body appointed under subsection 1 of Section 49 that reviews appeals against decisions made by the authority. Board. The Central Advisory Board constituted by the central government under subsection 1 of Section 42 to provide guidance on wage-related matters. Chairperson. The individual who leads and presides over the board's proceedings and activities. Day. A standard 24-hour period, beginning at midnight for calculation and compliance purposes. Form. Any official document template appended to these rules for regulatory submissions. Occupation categories. Classifications of work, based on skill requirements. Unskilled requiring minimal training and technical knowledge. Semi-skilled requiring some specialized training and experience. Skilled requiring substantial training and technical competence. Highly skilled requiring advanced training, specialized knowledge, and independent judgment. Minimum wages calculation. The calculation of minimum wages incorporates the following essential components. Standard working class family consists of an earning worker, spouse, and 2 children, equivalent to 3 adult consumption units. Nutritional requirements. Daily nutritional intake of 2,700 calories per consumption unit. Clothing requirements. Annual provision of 66 meters of cloth per standard working class family. Housing and utilities. Housing rent expenditure constitutes 10% of food and clothing expenditure. Fuel, electricity, and other miscellaneous items constitute 20% of the minimum wage. Essential services expenditure for children's education, medical requirements, recreation, and contingencies constitutes 25% of the minimum wage. Working hours and rest days. Normal working day, consists of 8 hours of work and 1 or more intervals of rest, which in total shall not exceed 1 hour, spread over. The working day of an employee shall not spread over more than 12 hours on any day. Weekly rest day. An employee shall be allowed a day of rest every week, ordinarily Sunday, but the employer may fix any other day of the week as the rest day. Substituted rest day. If an employee works on a rest day, they must be given a substituted rest day within 5 days before or after the original rest day. Central Advisory Board composition. The board comprises representatives from key stakeholders to ensure balanced governance and diverse perspectives. 12 designated representatives from employer organizations, 12 designated representatives from employee associations, several independent members, including the appointed chairperson. Representatives from various state governments. Meeting procedures. The chairperson has the authority to convene board meetings as necessary, with a mandatory 15-day advance notice specifying the date, time, venue, and detailed agenda. Decision-making process. All matters before the board are resolved by majority vote of members present during the meeting. In instances of tied votes, the chairperson exercises a decisive casting vote to break the deadlock. Term limitations. Both the chairperson and members serve a standard term of 2 years. While eligible for renomination, individuals may not serve more than 2 consecutive terms in total, ensuring regular renewal of leadership. Payment of dues and claims. Payment after death. In the event of an employee's death, any outstanding amounts due shall be deposited with the Deputy Chief Labor Commissioner, Central, for disbursement to rightful claimants. Undisbursed dues. Any wage amounts remaining undisbursed for a period exceeding 6 months must be deposited with the Deputy Chief Labor Commissioner, Central, along with detailed statements. Investment of deposits. All amounts deposited with the authority shall be invested in accordance with regulations, either in government securities or as fixed deposits in scheduled banks to ensure preservation of value. The Deputy Chief Labor Commissioner, Central, shall display a notice containing all relevant particulars of the undisbursed amounts and publish this information in at least 2 newspapers with wide circulation. If such amounts remain unclaimed for a period of 7 years from the date of deposit, they shall be transferred and utilized as directed by the central government under the provisions of the Code. Forms, registers and wage slip. The Code on Wages, Central, Rules, 2020 mandates specific forms for maintaining compliance records. Form I, comprehensive register for tracking wages, overtime, fines, and deductions for damage or loss. Form 2, unified application under subsection 5 of Section 45. Form 3, official appeal document under Section 49. 1 of the Code on Wages, 2019. Form IV, standardized employee register for workforce documentation. Form V, mandatory wage slip format for payment records. Form 6, formal application for composition of offense. Employers must issue wage slips to all employees in Form V format, either electronically or in physical form, on or before the date of wage payment. Code on Wages, 2019. VV Gary National Labor Institute, Noida. The Code on Wages establishes a comprehensive framework to regulate wage and bonus payments across all employment sectors where industry, trade, business, or manufacturing activities are conducted. The legislation is structured into 9 chapters and 67 sections, with 26 clearly defined terms that are consistently used throughout the document. This code aims to promote equity and labor welfare while ensuring enterprise sustainability, thereby stimulating economic growth and fostering employment opportunities nationwide. Code on Wages. Key reform measures. Establishments. Any location where industry, trade, business, manufacturing, or occupation is conducted, including government establishments. Workers. Any person, excluding apprentices, employed in any industry to perform manual, unskilled, skilled, technical, operational, clerical, or supervisory work for compensation. Employee. Any person employed on wages by an establishment to perform skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled, manual, operational, supervisory, managerial, administrative, technical, or clerical work for compensation. Employer. A person who employs one or more employees in their establishment, whether directly or through another person, or on behalf of themselves or another person. Wages. All remuneration payable to an employed person in respect of their employment, including salaries and allowances, provided the terms of employment are fulfilled. Wage Code 2019. Extended coverage and benefits. The Wage Code extends legal coverage of both floor wage and minimum wage rates to approximately 224.7 million employees, 48% of the total 468.8 million workforce, as per PLFS 2018-19, benefiting an additional 76.4 million wage earners. New beneficiaries primarily include vulnerable groups within the labor market, rural workers, women, those with limited education, casual workers, ST and OBCs, agricultural and construction laborers, and workers in tiny and micro enterprises. The code introduces the statutory wage floor concept based on minimum living standards for workers, established by the central government in consultation with state governments and the Central Advisory Board on Wages. This wage floor may be implemented as a single national standard or with regional variations. Importantly, minimum wages set by central and state governments must meet or exceed this floor level and cannot be reduced if they are already higher. Economic and social impact of wage code. Economic growth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Higher average wages will drive inclusive economic growth, effectively reducing poverty and inequality across the workforce. Reduced inequality. Wage inequality will decrease by 10 percentage points, with Gini coefficient improving from 0.499 to 0.398. Gender equality. Gender wage gaps will narrow significantly, 4 by 6 percentage points among regular workers and 18 percentage points among casual workers. Poverty reduction. Probability of low wage workers living in poverty will decrease by 8-9 percentage points, achieved with minimal fiscal impact. The code establishes uniform statutory criteria for setting and revising minimum wages, typically every 5 years, ensuring timely adjustments based on clear standards rather than arbitrary decisions. To protect workers' purchasing power, the code mandates biannual minimum wage adjustments for inflation on April 1st and October 1st, safeguarding real wages against rising costs of living. Simplified wage structure and definitions. Extended employer definition. Contractors, now classified as employers. Clear wage definition. Standardized definitions of wages and remuneration. The new code significantly streamlines India's complex minimum wage structure, reducing the number of minimum wage rates from 1,915 across states to between 3 and 12 rates per state. This simplification enhances awareness, improves enforcement capabilities, and increases compliance with the minimum wage system nationwide. Key improvements include expanding the employer definition to include contractors, establishing uniform definitions for wages and remuneration, limiting in-kind payments to a maximum of 15% of total wages, and extending overtime compensation at twice the normal rate to all employees, with written consent required before overtime work. Timely payment of wages. Wage period. Time limit for payment of wages. Daily basis, at the end of the shift. Weekly basis, on the last working day of the week. Fortnightly basis, before the end of the second day after the end of the fortnight. Monthly basis, before the expiry of the 7th day of the succeeding month. The code universalizes timely payment of wages to all employees across all establishments regardless of wage ceiling. This represents a significant development in wage protection, ensuring employees receive their compensation on time. Key provisions include promotion of digitization through bank account transfers and electronic payment modes. Mandatory issuance of wage slips to all employees by employers in cases of termination, removal, dismissal, retrenchment, resignation, or unemployment due to closure. Wages must be paid within 2 working days. Explicit responsibility placed on employers for payment of all dues and burden of proof in claims related to non-payment. Extended limitation period for filing claims before authorities increased from 6 months to 3 years. Implementation of fast-track claim adjudication process for efficient resolution. Payment of wages and deductions. No unauthorized deductions. Wages shall be paid in full, with no deductions permitted except those specifically authorized under this code. Permissible deductions. Authorized deductions include I. Fines. 2. Absence from duty. 3. Employer-provided accommodation. I. Recovery of advances or loans. V. Income tax and other statutory levies. Deduction limits. Total deductions must not exceed 50% of an employee's total wage in any wage period. Any excess may be recovered in subsequent periods. Gender equality. Gender-based discrimination in wages, recruitment processes, and working conditions is strictly prohibited across all establishments. For deductions exceeding 50%, the excess amount shall be recovered according to procedures specified by the appropriate government. Work of similar nature refers to tasks requiring equivalent skill, effort, experience, and responsibility when performed under comparable working conditions. Disputes regarding whether work is of the same or similar nature shall be resolved by authorities designated by the appropriate government. Compliance, inspection, and penalties. 1. Reduced compliance burden. Streamlined regulations from 111 to 69 sections to inspector cum facilitator provides guidance and oversight to employers. 3. Graded penalties. Strengthened deterrence. Through enhanced penalties, the code streamlines business operations by reducing regulatory complexity. Consolidated regulations from 111 sections across 4 wage-related laws to a more manageable 69 sections. Standardized definitions for key terms including wages, workers, employees, employers, establishments, and appropriate government. Consolidated multiple authorities into simplified structures, replacing 8 different rule systems with a single comprehensive framework. Modernized compliance through electronic filing, standardized templates for registers, returns, and forms. The code transforms the inspection system to enhance transparency and reduce arbitrary enforcement, redefining inspectors as facilitators who provide guidance and information alongside their oversight role. Implementing web-based inspection protocols with randomized inspector selection, introducing electronic information systems that reduce in-person interventions and potential corruption.
The Code on Social Security, 2020. The Code on Social Security, 2020 represents a landmark legislation that consolidates 9 previous labor laws relating to social security and welfare in India. It expands social security coverage to previously excluded workers, including gig workers, platform workers, and workers in the unorganized sector, providing comprehensive protection through various benefit schemes. After receiving presidential assent on September 28, 2020, the Code introduces progressive measures such as universal social security coverage, simplified digital registration processes, and strengthened compliance mechanisms to ensure worker welfare. Scope and applicability. Employees' Provident Fund applies to all establishments with 20 or more employees. This retirement benefit scheme ensures financial security for workers after their service period. Employee State Insurance covers establishments employing 10 or more persons, as well as all hazardous occupations regardless of employee count. This scheme provides medical, disability, maternity, and unemployment benefits. Gratuity extends to factories, mines, oil fields, plantations, ports, railways, and other establishments with 10 or more employees. This reward scheme recognizes long service upon retirement or resignation. Maternity benefit encompasses factories, mines, plantations, and establishments with 10 or more employees. This benefit ensures paid leave and medical support for women during pregnancy and childbirth. Employees' Compensation covers employers and employees not included under the Employee State Insurance chapter. This scheme provides financial protection in case of work-related injuries, disabilities, or fatalities. Social Security Organization's Central Board of Trustees manages the Employees' Provident Fund and associated schemes, composed of a chairperson, vice chairperson, government officials, state representatives, and members representing both employers and employees. Employee State Insurance Corporation oversees the Employee State Insurance Scheme, structured with a chairperson, vice chairperson, government officials, state representatives, and members from employers, employees, and medical professionals. National Social Security Board governs social security measures for unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers, led by the Union Minister for Labor and Employment with diverse stakeholder representation. State Building Workers Welfare Board manages welfare funds for building and construction workers, delivers comprehensive benefits including death and disability coverage, pension plans, educational assistance, and medical expense reimbursement. Employees' Provident Fund. The Employees' Provident Fund, EPF, provides comprehensive retirement benefits through the following key mechanisms. Contribution structure. Employers contribute 10% of wages, which can be increased to 12%, with employees contributing an equal amount. Employees have the option to make voluntary additional contributions to enhance their retirement savings. Fund administration. 3 distinct funds: for Provident Fund, Pension Fund, and Insurance Fund 4 are professionally managed by the Central Board of Trustees in accordance with their respective scheme guidelines and investment regulations. Account portability. When changing employers, workers can seamlessly transfer their accumulated balances in both Provident Fund and pension accounts through established procedures specified in the schemes, ensuring continuity of retirement benefits. Grievance mechanism. For disputes regarding contribution assessments or penalty damages, employees and employers can file appeals with the EPF Tribunal, which is mandated to resolve cases within a 1-year timeframe. Employee State Insurance. The Employee State Insurance (ESI) scheme provides comprehensive social security benefits to workers and their families. Medical benefits. Full medical care, including consultation, treatment, hospitalization, medications, and laboratory services at ESI hospitals, dispensaries, and panel clinic sickness benefits, cash compensation at 70% of wages for up to 91 days during certified illness maternity benefits, paid leave and medical care for women employees during pregnancy and post-delivery period disablement benefits, financial support for temporary or permanent disabilities resulting from employment injuries dependence benefits, monthly payments to eligible family members in case of work-related death. The scheme is administered by the Employee State Insurance Corporation, ESIC, and funded through joint contributions from employers and employees, with rates determined by the central government. The ESI Act ensures social protection for workers in the organized sector against financial hardships during periods of health-related contingencies. Maternity and gratuity benefits. Maternity benefits. Women employees are entitled to comprehensive support during and after pregnancy. Generous paid maternity leave of 26 weeks, reduced to 12 weeks for women with 2 or more children. Financial support through a medical bonus of Rs. 500. Compassionate leave of 6 weeks for miscarriage or medical termination of pregnancy. Convenient nursing breaks until the child reaches 15 months of age. Access to creche facilities and establishments employing 50 or more workers. Legal protection against dismissal during pregnancy period. Gratuity benefits. Employees receive gratuity payments as recognition of their service upon reaching superannuation age. Voluntary retirement or resignation. Unfortunate events of death or disablement. Completion of contract under fixed term employment arrangements. Gratuity is calculated at the rate of 15 days' wages for each completed year of service, after completing 5 years of continuous employment, reduced to 3 years for working journalists, serving as an important financial safety net for workers, employees' compensation, and building workers' welfare. The Code establishes robust protections for workers injured during employment and creates a dedicated welfare framework for building and construction workers. Through the Building Workers Welfare Board, a comprehensive fund is administered to deliver essential Social Security benefits to registered construction workers. Compensation for occupational injuries. Employers are legally obligated to provide compensation for personal injuries sustained through workplace accidents or occupational diseases arising from employment. Building Workers Welfare Fund, financed through a construction cess collected from employers, amounting to 1 to 2% of total construction cost. Comprehensive welfare benefits encompasses death and disability assistance, pension provisions, educational scholarships, medical expense coverage, and maternity support. Unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. Social Security schemes. The central government formulates comprehensive schemes covering life and disability protection, health and maternity benefits, old age security, and educational assistance for unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. Social Security Fund, a dedicated financial reserve established by the central government to ensure sustainable funding for Social Security measures and welfare initiatives targeting unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. Registration system. Workers must complete registration to access benefits, with Aadhaar-based verification mandated as the primary method for establishing and authenticating identity. Aggregator contributions. Aggregators are required to contribute between 1 and 2% of their annual turnover, capped at 5% of the amount paid to workers, to finance Social Security schemes specifically designed for gig and platform workers. The Code acknowledges the evolving landscape of employment and extends crucial Social Security protections to previously neglected categories of workers in the unorganized sector, including gig workers and platform workers who constitute a rapidly expanding segment of India's workforce. Ministry of Labour and Employment Notification, New Delhi, November 13, 2020. GSR 713, E. For the central government hereby proposes to make the following draft rules in exercise of powers conferred by sections 154, 155, and 158 of the Code on Social Security, 2020, 36 of 2020, read with Section 24 of the General Clauses Act 1897, 10 of 1897. These draft rules will supersede the following existing rules: Employee State Insurance, Central Rules, 19,501. Tribunal Procedure Rules, 19,972. Employees Provident Funds Appellate Tribunal, Conditions of Service, Rules, 19,973. Employment Exchanges, Compulsory Notification of Vacancies Rules, 19,604. Maternity Benefit, Mines and Circus, Rules, 19,635. Payment of Gratuity, Central Rules, 19,726. City Workers Welfare Fund Rules, 19,847. Building and Other Constructions Workers Welfare Cess Rules, 19,988. Unorganized Workers Social Security Rules, 20,099. Draft Rules and Preliminary Information. Short title: and extent. These rules, called the Code on Social Security, Central Rules, 2020, extend to the whole of India. Definitions include essential terms such as agency, appeal, appellate authority, assessing officer, and other key terminology. Application of provisions specifies the manner and conditions under which provisions apply to various establishments. Legislative authority, drafted by the central government under powers conferred by the following acts, which are repealed by Section 164 of the Code on Social Security. Employee State Insurance Act, 1948, 34 of 1948. 1. Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952, 19 of 1952. 2. Employment Exchanges, Compulsory Notification of Vacancies Act, 1959, 31 of 1959. 3. Maternity Benefit Act, 1961, 53 of 1961. 4. Payment of Gratuity Act, 1972, 39 of 1972. 5. City Workers Welfare Fund Act, 1981, 33 of 1981. 6. Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act, 1996, 28 of 1996. 7. Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, 2008, 33 of 2008. 8. Public Notification, published as required by Section 158 for the information of all persons likely to be affected. Review period. The draft notification will be considered after a 45-day period from the date when copies of the official gazette containing this notification are made available to the public. Supersession clause applies except for matters already done or omitted to be done before such supersession. Social Security Organization's Central Board, Employees Provident Fund Comprehensive Regulations for Fund Administration Protocols for Executive Committee Assistance and Oversight, Specific Terms and Conditions for Board Members, Employee State Insurance Corporation Structured Administrative Framework and Governance Mechanisms for State Representation and Participation, Guidelines for Standing Committee, Constitution defined scope and authority of Medical Benefit Committee, National Social Security Board established protocols for exercising statutory powers, transparent process for member nomination, defined tenure and term limitations, standardized procedures for functional operations, general provisions, scheduled intervals for regular meetings, formalized procedures for business transactions, standardized compensation structure for board members. Stakeholders wishing to submit objections or suggestions should address them to Shri Rahul Bhagat, Director, Ministry of Labor and Employment, Room number 302, Shram Shakti Bhawan, Rafi Marg, New Delhi 110001, or via email to rahul.bhagat@nic.gov.in. All submissions must follow the prescribed format containing 1. Name and address of the person, organization, 2. Specific chapter and rule or subrule proposed for modification, 3. Complete text of the proposed revised rule or subrule, and 4. Comprehensive justification for the suggested changes. Employees Provident Fund and State Insurance Employees Provident Fund prescribed form, manner, time limits, and fees for filing appeals under Section 23. Designated language of the tribunal. Established procedures for filing appeals, requirements for presentation and scrutiny of appeals, authorized place of filing appeals, mandatory fee structure, stipulated time frame for filing appeals, and requirements for deposit of amounts due. Employee State Insurance Comprehensive Salary Structure, and allowances for the Director General and Financial Commissioner. Specific powers and statutory duties of the Director General and Financial Commissioner. Regulated manner and guidelines for investment of the Employee State Insurance Fund. Prescribed limits and conditions for defraying expenditure on promotion of health and welfare measures. Procedures and administration. Comprehensive procedures governing appeals, submission of applications, conduct of hearings, and methods for recovery of outstanding amounts. Detailed qualification requirements for benefit claims, specific conditions, prescribed rates and designated periods for payment of dependents' benefits. Structured framework for administration of the corporation, and formalized representation of states within the governance system. Gratuity and maternity benefits. Gratuity provisions. Designated banking institutions for managing gratuity investments for minors. Prescribed timeframes and formats for employee nomination procedures. Standardized application process, payment notification and disbursement methods. Established protocols for handling directional applications. Maternity benefit required documentation for verifying pregnancy, childbirth, and miscarriage. Structured framework for maternity and supplementary benefit payments, specified duration and scheduling of nursing breaks. Mandatory standards for workplace creche facilities. Appeals and authorities. Designated appellate authorities for dispute resolution. Defined responsibilities and jurisdictions of competent authorities and inspector cum facilitators. Standardized form distribution and record maintenance requirements. These regulations establish detailed frameworks governing gratuity disbursement, including standardized application formats, notification requirements, and payment protocols. For maternity benefits, the rules clearly define documentation requirements, payment structures, and essential workplace accommodations for new and expectant mothers. Additionally, the regulations outline comprehensive appeals mechanisms and specific enforcement responsibilities for regulatory authorities. Building workers and cess collection. The building workers cess collection framework encompasses these essential procedures. Information submission. Employers must submit comprehensive construction details through Form XV1. Cess assessment. Accurate self-assessment based on total construction cost at legally prescribed rates. 2. Payment and transfer. All collected proceeds are systematically transferred to the State Building Workers Welfare Board. 3. Appeals and refunds. Structured process for assessment appeals and recovery of excess cess payments. 4. The regulatory framework explicitly defines procedural methodology and timeline for cess collection under Section 100. Standardized protocols for depositing collected cess amounts. Uniform rate structure for advance cess payments. Mandatory deadlines for cess remittance. Applicable interest. Penalties for delayed payments. Designated authorities empowered to conduct inquiries and impose penalties. Statutory time limitations and procedural requirements for filing appeals against assessment orders. Unorganized workers and gig workers. Registration process. Workers of eligible age can self-register through a designated portal using their Author identification. Digital accessibility. Multiple registration options available, including user-friendly mobile applications and web portals. Information management. Mandatory periodic updates of personal information to maintain eligibility for benefits. Financial framework. Authorized collection and allocation of contributions from aggregator companies to support worker benefits. The regulatory framework establishes comprehensive guidelines for the unorganized sector, including specific age eligibility criteria and streamlined self-registration procedures. These provisions require aggregator platforms to transparently share worker information and make timely Social Security Fund contributions. The regulations also implement a penalty system with specified interest rates for delayed payments and create a structured self-assessment mechanism for aggregators to calculate their required contributions accurately. Finance, accounts and miscellaneous provisions. Financial management framework. Comprehensive guidelines governing property transactions, investment strategies, and loan procedures. Compliance obligations, mandatory requirements for record maintenance, timely submission of returns, and facilitation of inspection processes. Standardized documentation. Suite of 26 prescribed forms designed for consistent application and reporting procedures. Finance and accounts protocols. Regulatory parameters for acquisition and disposal of property assets. Strategic directives for fund investment and portfolio management. Structured framework for securing and managing loans. Systematic procedures for writing off irrecoverable financial obligations. Comprehensive standards for accounting practices and financial record-keeping. Enforcement mechanisms. Detailed classification of statutory violations with corresponding penalty structures. Established procedures for compounding and resolving infractions. Workforce intelligence system. Institutional framework for establishing and operating career centers. Mandatory requirements for reporting and documenting employment vacancies. Supplementary governance provisions. Comprehensive guidelines for establishing and administering the Social Security Fund. Qualifying criteria. An application process for exemptions from specific code provisions. Social Security Code. The Social Security Code 2020 is a landmark legislation that consolidates 9 existing labor laws into a single comprehensive framework, streamlining Social Security benefits for workers across organized and unorganized sectors. It significantly expands coverage to previously excluded unorganized sector workers, including gig workers, platform workers, and self-employed individuals, ensuring broader social protection. This reform addresses a critical need, as unorganized workers constitute over 90% of India's 500 million workforce, but have historically lacked adequate Social Security coverage. Understanding Social Security. Definition of Social Security. Social Security is recognized as a fundamental human right under Article 22 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It represents the protective measures a society establishes to ensure individuals and households have access to health care and income security, particularly during vulnerable periods such as old age, unemployment, illness, disability, workplace injuries, maternity, or after losing a family breadwinner. The Social Security Code defines it as the measures of protection afforded to employees, unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers to ensure access to health care and to provide income security throughout life. People inevitably face various contingencies that carry significant financial implications. The primary purpose of Social Security systems is to provide a safety net during these contingencies, ensuring financial stability and well-being for individuals and families. Key definitions in the Social Security Code. Employee: any person employed on wages by an establishment directly or through a contractor, to perform work of any nature. Skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled, manual, operational, supervisory, managerial, administrative, technical, or clerical. Interstate migrant worker, a person employed in an establishment who has either been recruited by an employer or contractor in one state for employment in another state, or has independently relocated from one state to secure employment in an establishment in another state. Such workers must earn wages not exceeding 18,000 rupees per month. Unorganized sector, an enterprise owned by individuals or self-employed workers engaged in the production or sale of goods or providing services, where the total number of workers employed is less than 10 gig worker, a person who performs work outside of traditional employer-employee relationships, typically engaging in short-term, flexible work arrangements. Platform worker, a person who accesses organizations or individuals through an online platform and provides specific services in exchange for payment. Rationale for Social Security reform. Key reasons for reform: universal coverage extending Social Security protection to all workers. 1. Integration of systems eliminating redundancies between existing schemes. 2. Efficient delivery structure implementing grassroots level registration and benefit distribution. 3. Ease of compliance streamlining processes to improve business operations and regulatory adherence. 4. International standards harmonizing with ILO Convention 102 requirements. The urgency for reform is underscored by India's substantial informal sector, comprising 90% of the workforce. Additionally, female labor force participation remains concerning, with rural women's participation declining from 28% to 25% since 2011-12, while urban women's participation stagnates at approximately 20%. PLFS 2017-18. Despite recommendations from various commissions, Social Security coverage predominantly remains limited to formal workers in the organized sector. The National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector, NCIS, found that a mere 6% of informal workers received any form of Social Security benefits, highlighting the critical need for comprehensive reform. Structure of the Social Security Code. The Code on Social Security, 2020, number 36 of 2020, was introduced in Lok Sabha on September 19, 2020, swiftly passed by both houses of Parliament by September 23, 2020, and received presidential assent on September 28, 2020. Comprehensive amalgamation consolidates 9 existing Social Security legislations into a single unified code-structured framework, contains 14 detailed chapters addressing various aspects of Social Security protection, inclusive coverage, extends benefits to previously excluded workers in unorganized, gig, and platform sectors. The code strategically integrates these 9 critical labor laws: the Employees Compensation Act 19231, the Employees State Insurance Act 19482, the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 19523, the Employment Exchanges Act 19594, the Maternity Benefit Act 19615, the Payment of Gratuity Act 19726, the City Workers Welfare Fund Act 19817, the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act 19968, the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 20089. Key schemes under the Social Security Code. The Social Security Code establishes comprehensive welfare schemes to protect workers across various employment sectors. Each scheme operates with specific eligibility criteria based on establishment type and workforce size. Employees Provident Fund, mandatory for establishments employing 20 or more workers, providing retirement savings security. Employee State Insurance covers health care and disability benefits for establishments with 10 or more employees. Gratuity rewards long service, 5+ years, in factories, mines, and establishments with 10 or more employees. Maternity benefit ensures paid maternity leave and medical benefits for women in factories, mines, and establishments with 10 or more employees. Under the Employees Provident Fund scheme, both employer and employee contribute equally at 10% of wages. For the Integrated Pension Scheme, the allocated contribution is capped at 8 1/3% of wages, ensuring long-term retirement security while maintaining financial sustainability. Social Security for Unorganized Workers process and benefits. Registration open to all workers age 16 and above through simple self-declaration. 1. Social Security Fund dedicated financial protection for unorganized, gig, and platform workers. 2. Comprehensive welfare schemes coverage including life and disability insurance, health care, maternity benefits, and retirement security. 3. Workers facilitation centers accessible support hubs for seamless registration and scheme navigation. 4. While the code replaces the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act of 2008, implementation remains a challenge. 4. with only 6% of unorganized workers currently covered by any form of Social Security despite 12 years since the original Act's enactment. The central government is mandated to develop and implement comprehensive welfare schemes for unorganized workers addressing life and disability coverage, health and maternity benefits, retirement security, educational assistance, housing support. State governments are responsible for complementary schemes, including Provident Fund establishment, workplace injury compensation, affordable housing initiatives, educational programs for workers, children's skills development and enhancement, funeral assistance support, senior care through old age homes, key reforms and benefits, universal coverage. Implementation of the Social Security Fund will extend protection to 40 crore unorganized workers, including gig and platform workers, ensuring comprehensive Social Security coverage nationwide. Enhanced ESIC coverage. ESIC benefits will expand from the current 566 districts to all 740 districts, providing health care and insurance benefits to workers across the entire country. Broader EPFO protection. EPFO coverage will now apply to all establishments with 20-plus workers, regardless of industry type, moving beyond the previous limited schedule-based approach. Streamlined national database. A simplified online registration system based on self-certification will create a comprehensive national database of unorganized sector workers, facilitating better policy planning and benefit delivery. Robust accountability measures. Employers failing to deposit workers' contributions face penalties up to Rs 100,000 and imprisonment of 1 to 3 years. In workplace accident cases, affected workers or their families will receive at least 50% of penalty amounts. Digital transformation. Mandatory electronic maintenance of all records and returns will enable seamless information exchange between government agencies and welfare funds, improving efficiency and transparency. The code significantly expands workforce protection by incorporating previously vulnerable groups, including unorganized sector workers, home-based and self-employed individuals, fixed-term employees, gig workers, platform workers, and inter-state migrants alongside contract employees. Notably, aggregator businesses must now contribute directly to the Social Security Fund, ensuring shared responsibility for worker welfare. The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, 2020. This transformative legislation, which received presidential assent on September 28, 2020, represents one of the most significant reforms in India's labor law framework in decades. The code strategically consolidates 13 existing labor laws into a single, comprehensive statute, eliminating regulatory overlap, while modernizing provisions for occupational safety, health, and working conditions across all sectors and establishments. It establishes robust mechanisms to enhance workplace safety standards, introduces welfare provisions for both organized and unorganized workers, reduces compliance burden for employers, and creates a more transparent regulatory framework that balances business efficiency with protection of workers' fundamental rights. Preliminary provisions. Short title and commencement. This legislation is officially designated as the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code, 2020, and shall come into effect on the date specified by the central government. Application scope. The code explicitly exempts offices of the central government, state government, and any naval warship of any nationality from its regulatory purview. Key definitions. To facilitate precise interpretation and implementation, the code provides detailed definitions for critical terms, including employee, employer, establishment, factory, hazardous process, and other pertinent terminology. Mandatory registration. All employers are required to register their establishments within 60 days from the date of applicability of this code to their respective operations.
Duties of employers and employees. Employer obligations. Employers must create and maintain hazard-free workplaces by complying with all occupational safety standards, providing free annual health examinations, establishing healthy working environments, implementing proper hazardous waste disposal procedures, and issuing formal appointment letters to all employees. Employee responsibilities. Employees must exercise reasonable care for personal and collective safety, adhere to all prescribed safety requirements, support employers in meeting statutory obligations, promptly report unsafe conditions, avoid tampering with safety equipment, and refrain from actions that could endanger themselves or colleagues. Employee rights. All workers are entitled to access comprehensive workplace health and safety information, present safety concerns to management or safety committees, report imminent dangers directly to the inspector-cum-facilitator, and expect timely remedial action when hazardous conditions are identified. Occupational Safety and Health National Board. The central government establishes the National Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board to provide expert guidance on policy formulation, implementation strategies, and technical standards across diverse industrial sectors nationwide. State Board. Each state government constitutes its own occupational safety and health advisory board to address region-specific challenges, coordinate with the national board, and ensure effective implementation of safety protocols at the local level. Safety standards. The central government develops and enforces comprehensive, industry-specific safety standards for factories, mines, dock operations, and other establishments to systematically prevent occupational hazards and workplace accidents. Research activities. Designated institutions conduct rigorous research, field experiments, and demonstration programs to advance scientific knowledge, develop innovative safety technologies, and promote evidence-based best practices in occupational health management. This integrated framework creates a multi-tiered approach to workplace safety, combining centralized policy direction with localized implementation, scientifically validated standards, and continuous improvement mechanisms to comprehensively protect workers across all industries and occupational environments. Health, safety, and working conditions. Health provisions. Comprehensive workplace standards including mandatory cleanliness protocols, adequate ventilation with regulated temperature levels, maintenance of environments free from hazardous substances, accessible potable drinking water, and sufficient workspace allocation for all employees. Safety measures. Critical safeguards encompassing proper illumination throughout work areas, gender-segregated sanitation facilities with privacy provisions, comprehensive waste management systems, establishment of dedicated safety committees with qualified officers, and provision of appropriate personal protective equipment. Welfare facilities. Employee-centered amenities, including accessible washing stations with proper hygiene provisions, secure changing and storage areas, ergonomic workstations, subsidized nutritious meal services, fully equipped first aid stations with trained personnel, and child-friendly creche facilities for working parents. Working conditions. Legally protected work parameters establishing 8-hour workday limitations, guaranteed weekly rest days with full compensation, double-rate overtime payment, structured annual leave entitlements based on service duration, and mandatory maintenance of comprehensive employment records. These provisions create a holistic framework that not only protects workers' physical well-being, but also promotes dignity, comfort, and work-life balance across all employment sectors, ultimately enhancing both productivity and job satisfaction. Special provisions for different sectors. Contract labor. The code establishes a mandatory licensing system for contractors, while ensuring comprehensive welfare facilities for contract workers. Employment of contract labor is strictly prohibited in core activities, except under specific circumstances clearly defined in the code. Contractors hold primary responsibility for ensuring timely and full payment of wages to all contract workers. Principal employers assume legal liability if contractors fail to fulfill their wage payment obligations to workers. Interstate migrant workers' enhanced protections include suitable working conditions, journey allowance, and guaranteed access to public distribution system benefits either in their native or destination state. The government is mandated to maintain a dedicated toll-free helpline and comprehensive database to support and monitor interstate migrant workers. Mines, factories, and construction. Stringent mine safety provisions require the appointment of qualified managers, designated safety officers, and established emergency rescue services. Factory operations must secure prior approval and proper licensing from appropriate government authorities before commencing work. Building and construction work is governed by sector-specific safety regulations and rigorous oversight mechanisms. Hazardous processes in factories necessitate enhanced safety protocols, mandatory information disclosure to workers, and comprehensive emergency preparedness standards. Inspection and enforcement. Inspector cum facilitator. The appropriate government appoints inspector cum facilitators with dual responsibilities conducting inspections, while also providing guidance to employers and workers regarding compliance requirements under the code. Inspection authority. Inspectors are empowered to enter workplace premises, conduct thorough examinations, investigate accidents, demand relevant documentation, conduct searches, seize non-compliant records, and collect material samples for laboratory analysis. Enhanced oversight for hazardous sectors. The code grants specialized enforcement powers for high-risk industries, including factories, mines, dock operations, and construction sites, with explicit authority to halt operations where imminent danger to worker safety exists. Graduated enforcement mechanisms. Code violations trigger monetary penalties ranging from 50,000 to 5 lakh, With imprisonment provisions for serious infractions, the legislation includes options for compounding certain offenses through specified financial settlements. Miscellaneous Provisions Social Security Fund. The Code establishes a dedicated Social Security Fund to ensure comprehensive welfare benefits for vulnerable workers in the unorganized sector. Power Delegation. The legislation establishes clear hierarchies for delegation of powers to appropriate government authorities and regulatory bodies for effective administration. Legal Proceedings. The Code specifies detailed provisions regarding burden of proof in various legal proceedings, creating procedural clarity for all stakeholders. Legal Protection. Officials and authorities implementing the Code receive immunity from prosecution for actions undertaken in good faith, while discharging their statutory duties. Exemption Authority. The appropriate government may exempt certain establishments from specific Code provisions during public emergencies or other exceptional circumstances. Rulemaking Powers. Both central and state governments are empowered to formulate detailed rules, regulations, and bylaws to facilitate seamless implementation of the Code. Consolidation Impact. This landmark legislation integrates 13 pre-existing labor laws into a unified legal framework, streamlining regulations for occupational safety, health, and working conditions. Ministry of Labor and Employment notification. On November 19, 2020, the Ministry of Labor and Employment issued a significant notification outlining draft rules under the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code, 2020 OSH Code 37 of 2020. These transformative draft rules seek to streamline regulation by consolidating multiple existing frameworks, including the Dock Workers, Safety, Health, and Welfare rules, building and construction workers rules, model factories rules, and various mining sector regulations into a single, comprehensive code. To ensure inclusive policy development, the ministry has initiated a formal public consultation process, actively soliciting feedback, objections, and suggestions from all affected stakeholders and industry participants. All interested organizations and individuals have been granted a 45-day window from the notification's publication date in the Official Gazette to submit their recommendations, which will be thoroughly reviewed before the final rules are implemented. Registration and licensing requirements. Application for registration. Employers must submit establishment registration applications electronically through Form I on the Shram Suvidha portal, including comprehensive establishment details and all required documentation. Following successful verification, the registration certificate, Form 2, will be issued electronically within 7 working days. Licensing process. Contractors must submit license applications electronically via the Shram Suvidha portal using Form 13. Upon approval, licenses will be issued in Form 14 with binding conditions, including non-transferability clauses and mandatory compliance with applicable wage regulations and labor standards. Renewal and amendment. License renewal applications must be submitted between 90 and 30 days before the expiration date. Applications submitted less than 30 days prior to expiry will incur a late fee of 25% above the standard renewal cost. License amendments can be requested through official designated channels, according to prescribed procedures. Duties of employers and employees. The Code establishes specific obligations for workplace participants. Annual health examination. Employers must provide free medical assessments for workers aged 45 plus annually, within 120 days of the calendar year's commencement. Qualified medical practitioners must conduct these examinations according to Form V protocols. Appointment letters. All employees must receive detailed appointment documentation specifying name, designation, compensation structure, and applicable Social Security entitlements. Employers must issue these letters to existing employees without such documentation within 3 months. Accident reporting. Fatal accidents require immediate notification via Form 6 to multiple authorities: Inspector cum Facilitator, Chief Inspector cum Facilitator, District Magistrate, Police Station, and the deceased's family members. Employee responsibilities. Workers must promptly report unsafe or unhealthy workplace conditions to their employer, health and safety representative, or safety officer through electronic communication, written documentation, or telephone at the earliest practical opportunity. Occupational Safety and Health Provisions Safety Committee. Establishments with 500+ workers must establish balanced safety committees with equal representation from management and workforce, ensuring adequate inclusion of women workers to address gender-specific workplace concerns. Safety officers. The Code requires specialized qualifications for safety officers in high-risk industries, including dock works, construction, and mining, with responsibilities specifically tailored to address each sector's unique hazards and challenges. Women's employment. Employers must obtain explicit consent for women working night shifts, provide secure transportation, ensure well-lit workspaces, and maintain accessible sanitation facilities, for all measures designed to uphold dignity and ensure safety. National Board. The National Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board includes government appointees with clearly defined membership protocols, featuring transparent procedures for resignation, termination, and disqualification to maintain governance integrity. The code establishes a comprehensive safety framework with clear accountabilities for all stakeholders, promoting consistent workplace safety standards across diverse industrial sectors, while fostering a proactive safety culture focused on prevention rather than reaction. Working hours and leave provisions. Working hours regulations. Employees are restricted to a maximum of 48 working hours per week, with daily shifts, including rest periods, not exceeding 12 hours. A mandatory rest interval of at least 30 minutes must be provided after 5 consecutive hours of work. Working journalists benefit from specialized provisions, 6-hour maximum for day shifts, and 5.5-hour maximum for night shifts. All overtime work must be compensated with equivalent compensatory rest hours. Leave entitlements for working journalists and sales promotion employees earn leave accrues at 1 month for every 11 months of continuous service. Medical leave at half wages accumulates at a rate of 1 month per 18 months of service. Quarantine leave with full wages for up to 21 days when medically necessary. Annual entitlement of 15 days casual leave per calendar year. 10 paid holidays annually with full wage compensation. The code further outlines detailed procedures governing leave applications, protocols for recalling employees during approved leave periods, and financial compensation mechanisms for accumulated unused earned leave. Record keeping and inspections. Maintenance of registers and records. Employers must maintain electronic registers in Form 8 documenting workers' wages, overtime, fines, and deductions. These records must be accessible at a designated office or building within the establishment premises. All records must be preserved for 1 calendar year after the final entry. Display requirements. A notice board must be prominently displayed at a conspicuous location. The notice must display the establishment's name, address, working hours, wage period, payment dates, accident details, inspector-cum-facilitator contact information, and unpaid wages payment dates. This ensures workplace transparency and regulatory compliance. Annual returns. Employers must submit a comprehensive annual return in Form 9 to the inspector-cum-facilitator by February 1st following each calendar year. An electronic copy must also be submitted to the Director General, Labor Bureau, within the same timeframe. Inspector-cum-facilitator powers. Authorized inspectors may collect substance samples from the workplace. They can issue prohibition or improvement notices through Form 12. Inspectors have authority to examine premises and documentation to verify compliance with code provisions and all associated regulations. Special provisions for different categories of workers. The code establishes tailored requirements for specific worker categories. Contract labor. Contractors must ensure wages align with the Code on Wages, 2019, providing contract workers with equal compensation, holidays, and working conditions as direct employees performing similar work. All work orders must be notified within 15 days of issuance. Interstate migrant workers. Employers must provide a lump sum travel allowance covering round-trip journeys to interstate migrant workers who have completed at least 180 days of service within the preceding 12 months. The Ministry of Labor and Employment maintains a dedicated toll-free helpline for addressing queries and resolving grievances. Audiovisual workers and producers must utilize the standardized agreement format, Form 16, which comprehensively details remuneration, working conditions, insurance benefits, and termination provisions. Disputes may be referred to a conciliation officer or appropriate tribunal for resolution. Mine workers. Rigorous provisions govern mining operations, including manager qualification requirements, mandatory medical examinations, emergency rescue protocols, and comprehensive safety measures. All mines must operate under qualified managers holding certifications specific to the mine's classification and operational scale. Penalties and enforcement mechanisms. Compounding of offenses. Government-appointed officers can resolve violations through electronic notices as alternatives to prosecution. Offenders must submit the compounding amount electronically within 15 days to prevent further legal proceedings. Inquiry procedures. Structured protocols guide investigations into workplace accidents, hazardous incidents, and occupational diseases. Appointed experts must conduct thorough examinations and submit detailed findings within 3 months. Safety surveys. under central government authorization, designated institutions may conduct workplace safety assessments that carry the same authority as official inspections. These evaluations generate recommendations that employers must implement to maintain compliance. This enforcement framework effectively balances accountability with remediation opportunities. While employers can address minor violations before facing prosecution, serious safety breaches result in substantial penalties. The system combines rigorous enforcement with educational initiatives to cultivate a compliance culture and elevate workplace safety standards across all industries. Occupational safety, health and working conditions. Code 2020 Overview. A landmark legislative reform consolidating 13 labor laws to strengthen workplace safety standards, enhance employee well-being, and streamline regulatory compliance. Occupational Health and Safety Evolution. First Factory Act, 1802. The British Parliament's Factory Health and Morals Act became the world's first legislation dedicated to worker protection, establishing a pivotal precedent for occupational safety standards. First Indian Factories Act, 1881. India established its foundational workplace safety framework with the Factories Act of 1881, introducing regulated working conditions and basic protections for industrial workers. National Policy on OSH, 2009. India significantly advanced its commitment to workplace welfare on February 20, 2009, when the Ministry of Labour and Employment implemented the Comprehensive National Policy on Safety, Health and Environment at Workplace, creating an integrated national framework for occupational protections. ILO Standards on Occupational Safety and Health, OSH Occupational Safety and Health Convention 155 1981, establishes comprehensive OSH principles and mandatory policies at both national and enterprise levels, implemented alongside Recommendation 164. With 69 countries formally ratifying its provisions, the convention was strengthened by Protocol 155, 2002, and Recommendation 194 on occupational diseases, which has received 13 ratifications. Occupational Health Services Convention 161, 1985, promotes the systematic establishment and integration of workplace health services within organizational structures. This convention is supplemented by Recommendation 171, providing practical guidance for implementation, and has been ratified by 33 countries worldwide. Promotional Framework for OSH Convention 187, 2006, provides a structured framework for developing and implementing national OSH policies and programs with continuous improvement cycles, supported by the detailed guidelines in Recommendation 197. This convention has secured ratification from 49 countries, demonstrating growing international commitment to workplace safety standards. The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions, Code 2020 Legislative Introduction, presented in the Lok Sabha on July 23, 2019 as a cornerstone of the government's comprehensive labor law reform initiative, designed to consolidate and modernize multiple existing regulations. Expert evaluation, referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on October 9, 2019 for thorough examination, technical assessment, and inclusive stakeholder consultations across industries. Legislative approval, successfully passed in the Lok Sabha on September 22, 2020. After incorporating substantial committee recommendations and strategic amendments to enhance worker protections. Constitutional ratification, received presidential assent, and was officially published in the Gazette of India on September 29, 2020, formally establishing it as a fundamental component of India's labor law framework. Strategic consolidation, 13 labor laws into one unified code. Factory and mining legislation. The Factories Act 1948, governing manufacturing premises safety standards. The Mines Act 1952, regulating underground and open cast extraction operations. Construction and maritime safety. The Dock Workers, Safety, Health and Welfare Act 1986, protecting port and harbor workers. The Building and Other Construction Workers Act 1996, safeguarding construction site personnel. Contract and Migrant Workforce Protection. The Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970, ensuring rights of outsourced workers. The Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation Act 1979, protecting workers employed across state boundaries. The Plantations Labor Act 1951, covering tea, coffee, rubber and other plantation workers. Industry-specific regulations. The Working Journalists Acts 1955, 1958, protecting media professionals. The Motor Transport Workers Act 1961, governing commercial vehicle operators. The Sales Promotion Employees Act 1976, covering marketing and sales staff. The Beidi and Cigar Workers Conditions of Employment Act 1966, regulating tobacco product manufacturing. The Cine Workers and Cinema Theater Workers Act 1981, Protecting Film Industry Personnel. This comprehensive consolidation transforms 622 complex legislative sections into just 143 streamlined provisions, dramatically simplifying compliance requirements, reducing regulatory redundancy, and enhancing enforcement effectiveness across diverse employment sectors. Key features of the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code registration and coverage applicable to all establishments employing 10 or more workers. Comprehensive coverage for mines and docks regardless of workforce size. Streamlined electronic registration process via the Shram Suvidha portal. Guaranteed registration certificate issuance within 7 working days. Employer responsibilities. Maintain workplace environments free from hazards and safety risks. Provide mandatory annual health examinations at no cost to employees. Issue formal appointment letters to all workers, ensuring documented employment. Ensure prompt reporting of accidents to designated authorities. Safety committee requirements. Mandatory implementation in establishments with 500+ workers. Required formation in mining operations employing 100+ workers. Compulsory establishment in factories with hazardous processes employing 250+ workers. Obligatory committees at construction sites with 250+ workers. Working hours regulations. Standard 8-hour maximum workday across all sectors. 6-day maximum work week with guaranteed rest periods. Double wage compensation for all overtime hours worked. Strict compliance with regulated working hours to prevent exploitation. Special provisions for contract and inter-state migrant workers. Contract labor reforms. Streamlined licensing system. Single comprehensive license replaces multiple fragmented permits. Mandatory experience certificates issued annually to workers or upon specific request. Equitable protection. All contract labor benefits fully extended to inter-state migrant workers. Enhanced definition of migrant workers. Scope expanded to include workers directly employed by establishments, previously restricted to contractor hired workers only. Encompasses workers employed under an agreement or other arrangement whose wages do not exceed the threshold notified by the central government. Robust support infrastructure. Dedicated toll-free helpline established for addressing inter-state migrant worker concerns. Mandatory periodic studies conducted by government agencies to assess migrant worker conditions. Comprehensive centralized electronic database implemented to maintain accurate records of all inter-state migrant workers. Implications of the Code on labor market. Critical concerns. The Labor Code introduces several significant challenges that warrant thorough examination. Coverage limitations. The Code's application is restricted to establishments employing 10 or more workers, creating a regulatory gap for smaller workplaces. This exclusion significantly compromises health and safety protections for workers in small-scale establishments. Diminished legal recourse. The Code explicitly prohibits civil courts from adjudicating related matters. Workers must resort to filing writ petitions directly to high courts, substantially limiting access to justice and eliminating the crucial first tier of legal remedies available in lower courts. Weakened child care framework. The Code relegates creche facilities to optional status, merely suggesting that the central government may establish rules for workplaces with more than 50 workers. This discretionary approach directly contradicts the Maternity Benefit Act's mandatory requirement for creche facilities in establishments of comparable size. The Industrial Relations Code, 2020. The Industrial Relations Code, 2020, number 35 of 2020, received presidential assent on September 28, 2020, marking a significant reform in India's labor legislation framework. This comprehensive legislation consolidates and modernizes laws governing trade unions, employment conditions in industrial establishments, resolution of industrial disputes, and related matters. Enacted by Parliament in the 71st year of the Republic of India, this landmark code applies to the entire territory of India. Implementation will occur in phases, with the central government authorized to notify different provisions through the official gazette, allowing for a strategic and orderly transition to the new regulatory framework. Definitions under the Code. Appropriate government refers to the central government for establishments under its authority: railways, mines, major ports, air transport, telecommunications, banking, insurance, and central SUs. The state government serves as the appropriate government for all other industrial establishments. Industry: any systematic activity carried out through employer-worker cooperation for the production, supply, or distribution of goods or services that satisfy human needs. Excludes charitable organizations and sovereign functions. Industrial dispute: any disagreement between employers and employers, employers and workers, or among workers that relates to employment, non-employment, terms of employment, or working conditions. Worker: any person employed in any industry, performing manual, unskilled, skilled, technical, operational, clerical, or supervisory work for hire or reward. Excludes persons subject to the Air Force, Army, or Navy Acts. Bipartite forums. Under the Code, the Industrial Relations Code establishes mandatory bipartite forums to facilitate employer-worker communication. Works Committee, for establishments employing 100-plus workers. The appropriate government may mandate the formation of a Works Committee comprising employer and worker representatives to foster harmonious workplace relations and resolve minor disputes. Grievance Redressal Committee. Industrial establishments with 20-plus workers must constitute one or more grievance redressal committees, specifically designed to address and resolve individual grievances at the workplace level. Committee composition. The Grievance Redressal Committee shall maintain equal representation between employers and workers, with specific provisions ensuring adequate representation of women workers to promote gender equity. Escalation process. Workers dissatisfied with committee decisions retain the right to escalate matters through their trade union for conciliation within 60 days, or may directly approach the Industrial Tribunal after 45 days from the date of filing a conciliation application. Trade unions registration. Any 7 or more members can form and apply for registration, with a membership requirement of at least 10% of workers or 100 workers, whichever is less. 1. Constitution must clearly specify the union's name, objectives, fund utilization procedures, membership criteria, democratic election process for officebearers, and other statutorily prescribed matters. 2. Rights and immunities. Registered unions gain corporate status with perpetual succession, legal protection from civil suits for legitimate activities, and authority to represent workers in various forums. 3. Recognition. Provisions exist for recognizing negotiating unions that have 51% or more worker support, or for establishing negotiating councils in scenarios where no single union commands majority support. 4. The Industrial Relations Code establishes comprehensive regulations governing trade unions, covering all aspects from formation and registration to operations and recognition. By setting clear criteria for determining legitimate negotiating entities, the Code ensures effective and democratic worker representation across industrial establishments, while protecting both union and management interests. Standing orders. Standing orders establish the formal rules governing workplace operations, covering all matters specified in the first schedule. These include worker classification, shift scheduling, leave entitlements, misconduct definitions, and termination procedures. The appointed certifying officer reviews these orders to ensure they are fair, reasonable, and compliant with labor laws, with a robust appeals process available for certification decisions. Applicability. Mandatory for all industrial establishments employing 300 or more workers. Preparation and certification. Employers must draft standing orders, based on model templates, within 6 months of establishment certification process. A designated certifying officer evaluates draft orders after thorough consultation with workers' representatives. Operation and modification. Standing orders become officially operational 30 days after certification, with provisions for modifications after a minimum 6-month implementation period. Industrial Disputes Resolution Mechanism. The Code establishes a comprehensive multi-tier dispute resolution system, progressing from collaborative discussions to formal legal proceedings when necessary. Bipartite discussions. Direct negotiations between employers and workers or their representatives to resolve issues internally. 1. Conciliation. Professional mediation by appointed conciliation officers, who facilitate settlement through structured dialogue. 2. Arbitration. Voluntary submission of unresolved disputes to mutually agreed upon arbitrators for binding decisions. Adjudication. Final resolution through industrial tribunals or national industrial tribunals when other methods prove insufficient. 4. The government appoints qualified conciliation officers to mediate disputes effectively, while specialized industrial tribunals and national industrial tribunals handle complex cases. These tribunals comprise both judicial and administrative members with relevant expertise and possess authority equivalent to civil courts for comprehensive dispute resolution. Layoffs, retrenchment and closure. Establishment size categories: small, fewer than 50 workers; medium, 5,299 workers; large, 300 plus workers. Layoff provisions. Small and medium establishments. Workers entitled to compensation at 50% of wages for up to 45 days. Large establishments. Prior government approval mandatory before initiating lay-offs. Retrenchment provisions. Small and medium establishments. 1 month notice or equivalent wages in lieu. Severance pay of 15 days wages per completed year of service. Large establishments. 3 months notice required and prior government permission. Mandatory closure provisions. Small establishments. No specific regulatory requirements. Medium establishments. 60 days advance notice to government authorities. Large establishments. 90 days advance notice and explicit prior government permission. The Industrial Relations Code implements tiered regulations based on establishment size, with more stringent requirements for larger organizations employing 300+ workers, where prior government permission is essential for layoffs, retrenchment, and closure. For smaller and medium establishments, employers must adhere to prescribed procedures, including mandatory notice periods and compensation packages. Additionally, the code establishes an innovative worker reskilling fund designed to support retrenched employees in developing new competencies, funded through contributions from employers and various other sources. Strikes, lockouts, and unfair labor practices. Strikes and lockouts prohibition. The code explicitly prohibits strikes and lockouts under the following circumstances: without providing notice at least 60 days before the intended strike, within 14 days after submitting a strike notice before the expiration date specified in the notice during ongoing conciliation proceedings, and 7 days thereafter during tribunal proceedings, and 60 days after conclusion during arbitration proceedings, and 60 days after resolution during the effective period of a settlement, or award. Unfair labor practices. The second schedule comprehensively defines unfair labor practices by both employers and workers. By employers, interfering with workers' rights to organize and form unions, establishing or dominating trade unions through financial control, discriminating against employees based on union membership, victimizing workers for union activities or legal complaints, refusing to engage in good faith collective bargaining by workers and unions, supporting or inciting illegal strikes in violation of code provisions, coercing or intimidating non-participating workers during strikes, engaging in productivity reducing tactics, such as go slow or gareo, willfully damaging employer property during labor disputes. The code strictly prohibits financial support of illegal strikes or lock-outs by any person. Violations constitute unfair labor practices and are punishable with fines between 10,000 and 2 lakh rupees, with substantially increased penalties for subsequent offenses. Ministry of Labor and Employment Notification Regulatory Update. The central government hereby proposes new comprehensive rules under Section 99 of the Industrial Relations Code, 2020, 35 of 2020, in accordance with Section 24 of the General Clauses Act, 1897, 10 of 1897. These regulations will replace the following existing frameworks: Industrial Tribunal, Procedure Rules, 1949 Industrial Tribunal, Central Procedure Rules, 1954 Industrial Disputes, Central Rules, 1957 Industrial Employment, Standing Orders, Central Rules, 1946 Public Notice Period. This notification serves to inform all potentially affected stakeholders of these significant regulatory changes. The draft rules will be formally considered after a 30-day period from the date when copies of the official gazette containing this notification become publicly available. Stakeholder participation. Interested parties may submit objections and suggestions regarding the proposed rules to Shri Sanjeev Nanda, Under-Secretary to the Government of India, Ministry of Labour and Employment, Room Number 17, Shram Shakti Bhawan, Rafi Marg, New Delhi 110001. Electronic submissions may be sent via email to sanjeev.dom@nic.in. Preliminary provisions. These rules establish fundamental definitions and core requirements regarding short title and application. These rules shall be officially designated as the Industrial Relations Central Rules, 2020. Their jurisdiction extends throughout the territory of India and all union territories, with the exception of those possessing independent legislative bodies. Definitions. For implementation purposes, code explicitly refers to the Industrial Relations Code, 2020. Section denotes any specific provision contained within the code, and electronically encompasses information submitted through authorized email channels, or directly uploaded to the designated government portal. Written agreement. Any formal agreement between employer and worker as defined under Clause C of Section 2 must be documented using Form I, bearing the signatures of all participating parties. Copies must be promptly furnished to the appropriate conciliation officer for official record keeping.
The Bipartite Forum's Constitution of Works Committee. Every industrial establishment with 100 or more workers must establish a Works Committee comprising representatives from both management and various worker categories. The committee shall maintain a maximum of 20 members to ensure effective functioning. and efficient decision-making, representation balance. The number of worker representatives must equal or exceed employer representatives to ensure fair representation. Registered trade unions shall nominate worker representatives proportionally based on their verified membership strength within the establishment. Office bearer structure. The Works Committee shall operate under a clearly defined leadership structure. A chairman appointed by the employer, a vice chairman elected from worker representatives, and both a secretary and joint secretary elected annually. To maintain governance balance, the secretary and joint secretary positions must alternate between employer and worker representatives. Term and meetings. Committee members serve a 2-year term. Meetings must occur at least quarterly. The employer is responsible for providing suitable facilities and accommodations to ensure effective committee proceedings and productive outcomes. Grievance Redressal Committee composition requirements. The Grievance Redressal Committee maintains balanced representation with equal members from both employers and workers, capped at 10 members total to ensure efficient decision-making. The committee includes female representatives proportionate to the workforce's female population, guaranteeing gender-inclusive resolution processes. Selection process. Management nominates employer representatives, prioritizing officials directly involved in daily operations who possess first-hand understanding of workplace dynamics. Registered trade unions select worker representatives. In establishments without registered unions, workers elect their representatives through a transparent, democratic process with proper documentation. Application process. Aggrieved workers submit formal applications detailing their dispute, including personal information, department designation, service tenure, and a comprehensive description of their specific concerns. Applications are accepted through both electronic and traditional methods and must be filed within 1 year from when the grievance originated. Standing orders. Adoption of model standing orders. Employers may implement the central government's model standing orders through a formal electronic submission to the designated certifying officer, thereby streamlining regulatory compliance procedures. Review by certifying officer. The certifying officer shall conduct a comprehensive examination of all submitted standing orders and may provide detailed observations or require specific amendments within the mandatory 30-day evaluation period. Automatic certification process. Standing orders are deemed officially certified and fully adopted if the certifying officer issues no observations or amendment directives within the established 30-day review timeframe. Multilingual documentation mandate. All certified standing orders must be maintained in Hindi, English, and the predominant local language of the state where the industrial establishment operates, ensuring accessibility and comprehension for the entire workforce. Notice of change and voluntary arbitration. Notice of change requirements. Mandatory notification. Employers must issue Form 2 notices to all workers who may be affected by proposed changes to working conditions, ensuring comprehensive workforce awareness. Strategic display. Notices must be prominently displayed on designated notice boards at the main entrance and in the manager's office to guarantee maximum visibility and accessibility for all personnel. Union communication. A formal copy must be delivered to the secretary of each registered trade union operating within the establishment to facilitate organizational awareness and proper representation. Voluntary arbitration process. Mutual consent agreement. For disputes referred to voluntary arbitration, all parties must jointly complete and sign Form 3, providing comprehensive details of the disagreement and establishing a foundation for resolution. Essential documentation. Arbitration agreements must clearly articulate the disputed matters, include complete information about all involved parties, identify affected workers or unions, and specify the total number of impacted employees to ensure thorough consideration. Binding timeframes. The arbitrator must deliver a definitive award within the stipulated period, with extensions permitted only when all involved parties provide explicit mutual written consent. Maintaining procedural integrity. Resolution of industrial disputes. The Industrial Relations Code establishes a comprehensive framework for resolving workplace conflicts through a strategic, multi-tiered approach designed to promote fair and efficient outcomes. Grievance Redressal Committee functions as the initial point of contact, ensuring expeditious resolution of disputes at the workplace level while preserving productive relationships. Conciliation proceedings. When internal mechanisms prove insufficient, specialized conciliation officers facilitate structured negotiations between disputing parties to reach mutually acceptable solutions. Arbitration. Parties may voluntarily submit their disputes to mutually appointed independent arbitrators for binding and enforceable decisions. Tribunal adjudication provides authoritative resolution through the Industrial Tribunal or National Industrial Tribunal when all other resolution avenues have been exhausted. Following unsuccessful conciliation efforts, Either party may petition the appropriate tribunal within 90 days of the conclusion of proceedings. The initiating party must submit a comprehensive statement of claim with all supporting documentation within 30 days of receiving the tribunal's directives. The responding party must file their detailed written statement within 30 days of the initial hearing date. Evidence may be presented either through direct testimony recorded at the tribunal or via sworn affidavits, with all deponents remaining subject to cross-examination. To ensure timely resolution and effective implementation, the tribunal must electronically transmit its final award to all concerned parties and the central government within 1 month of its formal pronouncement. Strikes, lockouts, and closure provisions. The Industrial Relations Code establishes clear protocols for workplace disruptions and organizational changes. Notice requirements. Trade unions must submit strike notices through Form 7 signed by the Secretary and 5 elected representatives. Employers must issue lockout notices via Form 8. Workers facing retrenchment require 60 days advance notice to the central government, while establishment closures necessitate 90 days prior notification. Retrenchment procedures. Employers must notify both the central government and Deputy Chief Labor Commissioner using Form 9. Retrenched workers receive priority consideration for rehiring within 1 year. Additionally, employers must contribute 15 days' wages to the Worker Reskilling Fund for each affected employee. Closure guidelines. Form 9 submission is mandatory. At least 90 days before the intended closure date, the government reserves a 30-day review period to evaluate and respond to closure applications. Worker Reskilling Fund. Employers must electronically transfer 15 days' worth of last drawn wages for each retrenched worker. Workers receive these funds within 45 days, specifically for skills development and career transition support. The Industrial Relations Code, 2020. Transforming India's labor landscape. Welcome to this groundbreaking online training program on India's revolutionary labor codes. This comprehensive course is meticulously designed to provide participants with an in-depth understanding of recent legislative reforms and their far-reaching implications for businesses and workers alike. Presented by Dr. Sanjay Upadhyay, Senior Fellow, V.V. Giri National Labor Institute, Noida, renowned expert in labor legislation and industrial relations with extensive experience in policy formulation and implementation, context and background. Need for regulation. Modern society thrives on the uninterrupted flow of goods and services, which demands harmonious collaboration between industry and workforce. These stakeholders operate with distinct priorities. Employers pursue maximum return on investment, while workers seek fair compensation, robust social security, and dignified working conditions. This fundamental divergence creates an inherent potential for conflict, necessitating effective regulatory frameworks to minimize disruptions and foster balanced, productive industrial relations. Previous legislation. Until recently, India's industrial relations were governed by 3 cornerstone legislations: the Trade Unions Act 1926, the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946, and the Industrial Disputes Act 1947. These long-standing enactments, while historically significant, had become increasingly outdated and misaligned with contemporary industrial dynamics and workforce needs, creating a broad consensus among stakeholders for the consolidation and modernization of these provisions to address 21st century requirements. Legislative journey of the IR Code. Significant milestones in the evolution of the Industrial Relations Code. Introduction in Parliament. The Industrial Relations Code Bill was formally presented in the Lok Sabha on November 28, 2019. For thorough scrutiny, it was subsequently referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on December 23, 2019. Stakeholder consultations. The committee embarked on extensive deliberations, gathering diverse perspectives from trade unions, employer associations, civil society organizations, and subject matter experts. This inclusive process involved formal hearings to collect oral testimony and seeking specific clarifications from government representatives. Recommendations finalized. Following comprehensive analysis and debate, the committee submitted its detailed report with policy recommendations on April 23, 2020. Legislative approval and enactment. The bill successfully secured approval in the Lok Sabha on September 22, 2020, followed by Rajya Sabha passage on September 23, 2020. Its formal enactment into law was marked by official notification in the Gazette of India on September 29, 2020. Structure of the Industrial Relations Code. The IR Code establishes a comprehensive legal framework consisting of 104 sections, providing detailed statutory provisions, 14 chapters, organized by subject matter and regulatory function, 3 schedules, containing supplementary provisions and technical details. This meticulously structured code encompasses the entire spectrum of industrial relations, from foundational definitions to sophisticated regulatory mechanisms. Key areas include trade union governance, standing orders, industrial dispute resolution, strikes, and lockouts regulation, layoffs, retrenchment, closure procedures, worker reskilling initiatives, and unfair labor practices prevention. The Code's chapters vary in scope and complexity. 3 concise chapters contain only one section each. Chapter 6. Voluntary Reference of Disputes to Arbitration. Chapter 11. Worker Reskilling Fund. Chapter 12. Unfair Labor Practices. 3 foundational chapters contain 2 sections each. Chapter 1. Preliminary Definitions and Scope. Chapter 2. Bipartite Forums for Workplace Collaboration. Chapter 5. Notice of Change Procedures. Schedules of the Industrial Relations Code. First schedule matters for standing orders under the Code. Sections 2, Z, and 30, 1, and 5. Worker Classification, Categorization and Grading System for all workers employed in the establishment. Work Period Notification, Methods for communicating shift timings, working hours, and holidays to employees. Shift operations, Framework for shift rotation and management to ensure operational continuity. Attendance standards, requirements for punctual attendance, and consequences for non-compliance. Leave administration, comprehensive procedures for requesting, approving, and documenting all leave type. Security measures, protocols for premises entry, exit, and inspection procedures. Operational interruptions, standard procedures during temporary work stoppages. Employment termination, structured processes and required notice periods for employment cessation. Disciplinary framework, formal procedures for addressing misconduct through suspension or dismissal. Grievance resolution, systematic mechanisms for addressing and resolving worker complaints. Second schedule. Unfair labor practices, sections 2, ZJ, 84, and 86. 5. Employer violations, prohibited practices including union interference, worker discrimination, unjustified dismissals, and other impermissible employer conduct. Worker violations, prohibited actions, including participation in illegal strikes, coercion of colleagues, intentional property damage, and other impermissible worker conduct. Third schedule. Conditions of service requiring change notification, section 40. Wage structure, modifications to compensation rates or payment frequency. Statutory contributions, changes to provident fund payments and other mandatory scheme contributions. Supplementary benefits, alterations to allowances and additional compensation elements. Work time parameters, adjustments to working hours, rest periods, and break allocations. Leave entitlements, revisions to holiday schedules and leave provisions. Shift arrangements, modifications to existing work patterns and shift configurations. Worker categorization, changes to employee classifications or designations. Privilege adjustments, removal or reduction of established concessions or privileges. Workplace conduct, modifications to disciplinary rules and standards. Operational restructuring, process changes for rationalization, standardization, or improvement affecting employment conditions. Salient features of the Code. Redefined industry scope. The Code narrows the definition of industry by excluding institutions owned or managed by organizations primarily engaged in charitable, social, or philanthropic services, sovereign functions, domestic services, and other activities as notified by the central government. Section 2(m). Refined definition of wages. The Code modifies the definition of wages under Section 2(z) by specifically excluding house rent allowance and conveyance allowance, which were previously included under Section 2(rr) of the Industrial Disputes Act, 1947. Enhanced definition of worker. The Code revises the worker definition by raising the salary threshold from INR 10,000 to INR 15,000 per month, or an amount as notified by the central government. Section 2(zm), thereby extending coverage to supervisory personnel earning up to this limit. Broadened definition of strike. The Code expands the definition of strike to include instances where 50% or more workers in an industry take concerted casual leave on a given day. Section 2(zf). Fixed-term employment and dispute resolution. Fixed-term employment formalized framework. Fixed-term employment establishes contractual worker engagement through explicit written agreements for specified durations. This employment category is now formally recognized within the Standing Orders Schedule Classification System. Section 2(l). Equal treatment mandate. Fixed-term employees are guaranteed identical statutory benefits as permanent employees performing comparable work, including comprehensive Social Security coverage and equitable wage structures. Section 2(l). Contract completion clarity. The natural conclusion of a fixed-term employment contract is legally distinguished from retrenchment, providing definitive regulatory certainty for both employers and workers. Section 2(zc). And first schedule. Item 1. Dispute resolution mechanisms. Mandatory grievance committee. Industrial establishments with 20+ workers must establish a balanced grievance redressal committee with proportional representation from both management and workforce to effectively address disputes concerning employment status, terms, and working conditions. Expanded resolution capacity. To enhance dispute management effectiveness, the Grievance Redressal Committee's maximum membership has been strategically increased from 6 to 10 representatives in qualifying establishments. Section 4. Consolidated Adjudication System. The Code fundamentally streamlines the industrial dispute resolution framework by consolidating previously fragmented adjudicative bodies, Court of Inquiry, Board of Conciliation, labor courts, into a unified industrial tribunal for handling appeals against conciliation decisions. Implications and innovations: streamlined collective bargaining. Trade unions representing at least 51% of workers now gain exclusive negotiating status, creating more efficient and decisive labor management dialogue. Strategic Reskilling Fund. A government-established fund requiring employers to contribute 15 days of last-drawn wages per retrenched worker, ensuring meaningful career transition support and continued employability. Expanded operational flexibility. Employers benefit from legally codified fixed-term employment frameworks and higher thresholds for closure permissions, significantly reducing regulatory compliance burdens. Comprehensive worker safeguards. Fixed-term employees receive guaranteed equal statutory benefits alongside permanent staff, complemented by robust multi-tiered dispute resolution mechanisms, including specialized grievance redressal committees. Potential implementation challenges. Industry experts highlight concerns that narrowed industry definitions and increased standing orders thresholds could create unintended regulatory gaps in worker protection frameworks. The Code on Wages, 2019. A comprehensive guide. The Code on Wages, 2019 represents a landmark labor reform that consolidates and streamlines 4 major existing legislations: the Payment of Wages Act 1936, the Minimum Wages Act 1948, the Payment of Bonus Act 1965, and the Equal Remuneration Act 1976. This transformative legislation introduces fundamental reforms designed to universalize provisions of minimum wages and ensure timely payment of wages across all employment sectors, regardless of industry type or wage ceiling. The Code significantly simplifies regulatory compliance by eliminating the multiplicity of definitions and authorities that previously created confusion and administrative burden for employers. In a progressive shift from enforcement to enablement, it transforms the role of inspector to inspector-cum-facilitator, emphasizing guidance and compliance assistance alongside traditional inspection duties. Key reforms and definitions under the Code on Wages. Universal minimum wage protection. The Code extends minimum wage guarantees and timely payment provisions to all employees across all sectors and wage brackets, ensuring comprehensive worker protection. Streamlined regulatory framework. By eliminating overlapping definitions and consolidating authorities, the Code creates a more efficient and cohesive legal structure for wage administration. Supportive enforcement approach. The transformation of the inspector role to inspector-cum-facilitator shifts the focus from punitive measures to guidance and compliance assistance for employers. Workplace gender equality. The Code strictly prohibits gender-based wage discrimination for the same or similar work under the same employer, reinforcing the principle of equal pay for equal work. Understanding employee and employer under the Code. Definition of employee. The Code on Wages, 2019 broadens the definition of employee to encompass individuals performing supervisory, managerial, and administrative functions within an establishment. This comprehensive definition ensures enhanced protection and coverage for workers across diverse roles and organizational hierarchies. Definition of employer. For factories, the employer is defined as the factory's occupier, or if designated, the person officially named as the factory manager under the relevant provisions of the Factories Act 1948. This precise definition establishes clear lines of accountability and legal responsibility for ensuring compliance with all wage-related statutory provisions. Equal pay for equal work principle. Prohibition of gender discrimination. The Code on Wages, 2019 explicitly prohibits gender-based discrimination in wage matters within any establishment or unit. Employers must ensure equal wages for employees performing the same or similar work, regardless of gender. Definition of same work or work of similar nature. This refers to work requiring comparable skill, effort, experience, and responsibility when performed under similar working conditions. Any differences that exist must not be of practical importance in relation to the terms and conditions of employment. This principle ensures fair compensation practices and helps eliminate historical wage disparities based on gender in the workplace. Methods for fixing minimum wages. Committee inquiry. Establishment of specialized committees to conduct comprehensive investigations, gather stakeholder input, and formulate evidence-based recommendations on appropriate minimum wage rates. 1. Publication of proposals. Transparent dissemination of proposed minimum wage notifications through official channels to inform all potentially affected parties and invite public discourse. 2. Final determination. After thorough evaluation of stakeholder feedback and economic considerations, the appropriate government authority finalizes and officially notifies the minimum wage rates for implementation. 3. Components of wages under the Code. Basic pay. The fundamental component of wages that serves as the foundation for calculating other allowances and benefits. It typically constitutes 40 to 50% of the total compensation package and remains fixed for a specified period. Dearness allowance, a cost of living adjustment paid to employees to mitigate the impact of inflation on real wages. This component fluctuates based on the consumer price index and helps maintain purchasing power during periods of rising prices. Retaining allowance, a strategic compensation element paid to valuable employees to encourage their continued service with the organization. This allowance is typically offered during challenging market conditions or when an employee possesses critical skills or expertise. Floor wage and overtime payment. Floor wage concept. The Code on Wages, 2019 establishes the central government's authority to fix floor wages based on minimum living standards of workers, as prescribed in Section 9.1. Floor wages may vary across different geographical areas to account for regional cost variations. According to Section 9.2, minimum wage rates fixed by appropriate government authorities under Section 6 cannot be lower than the floor wage established by the central government. Overtime payment rate is mandated by Section 14 of the Code on Wages, 2019. Employees working overtime must be compensated at a rate not less than twice their normal wage rate. This provision ensures workers receive fair compensation for hours worked beyond standard working periods, protecting their rights and acknowledging their additional effort. Wage periods and payment timelines. Employers must adhere to the following payment schedules based on designated wage periods. Daily basis. Wages must be disbursed at the conclusion of each shift. Weekly basis. Payment must be made on the final working day of the week, prior to the weekly holiday. Fortnightly basis. Wages must be settled no later than the second day following the end of the fortnight. Monthly basis. Payment must be completed before the seventh day of the subsequent month. Failure to comply with these timelines may result in penalties as prescribed under the applicable labor laws. Special payment provisions. The following expedited payment requirements apply when employment is terminated. Termination or dismissal. All wages earned must be paid within 2 working days from the date of termination or dismissal. Retrenchment. When an employee is retrenched, all outstanding wages must be settled within 2 working days of the retrenchment notice. Resignation. Upon voluntary resignation, all due wages must be disbursed within 2 working days of the employee's last working day. Establishment closure. If employment ends due to closure of an establishment, final wage payments must be completed within 2 working days of the closure. Claims and penalties under the Code. The formal process for wage-related claims and subsequent penalties follows these sequential steps. Claim filing. An employee or a registered trade union may file a claim with the appropriate authority regarding unpaid wages, payments below minimum wage, or unauthorized deductions. 1. Claim determination. The designated authority must conduct an inquiry and determine the claim amount within a mandated period of 3 months from the date of filing. 2. Compensation award. If the claim is validated, the authority may direct the employer to pay compensation of up to 10 times the claimed amount, depending on the severity and intent of the violation. 3. Penalty imposition. For first-time offenders, the authority may impose a financial penalty of up to $50,000, while repeat offenders face more severe penalties, including potential imprisonment. 4. All determinations made by the authority under these provisions are considered judicial proceedings and carry the force of a decree. Advisory boards and repeat offenses. Advisory board composition. The Code on Wages, 2019, stipulates that independent members can constitute no more than 1/3 of the total membership in both central and state advisory boards. This composition ensures a balanced representation from key stakeholders while preserving the board's autonomy in formulating wage-related recommendations. Penalties for repeat offenders. Employers previously convicted of underpaying wages who commit the same offense within 5 years of their first or subsequent conviction face enhanced penalties: imprisonment up to 3 months, fines up to 1 lakh, or both. This escalated penalty framework is designed to create a strong deterrent against recurring wage payment violations and protect workers' rights. Compounding of offenses. Eligible offenses. As per the Code on Wages, 2019, only offenses that are punishable with fine alone can be compounded by the authorized gazetted officer. 1. Compounding amount. The offense can be compounded for a sum equivalent to 50% of the maximum fine prescribed for such offense under the Code. 2. Application process. The employer must submit a formal application for compounding and remit the specified amount within the timeframe prescribed by the relevant authorities. 3. Resolution outcome. Upon successful completion of the compounding process, No further legal proceedings will be initiated against the employer for that specific offense. 4. The Code on Social Security, 2020. Definition and scope. Definition of Social Security. Social Security encompasses comprehensive protection measures afforded to all categories of employees, including unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. It ensures universal access to health care and provides income security, particularly during vulnerable periods such as old age, unemployment, sickness, disability, work-related injuries, maternity, or loss of a breadwinner. Protection is established through statutory rights conferred and formal schemes framed under the provisions of the Code on Social Security, 2020. Consolidated legislations. The Code on Social Security, 2020 strategically consolidates 9 central labor legislations into a unified framework. It incorporates the Employees' Compensation Act, 1923, which addresses work-related injury compensation. It subsumes the Employees' State Insurance Act, 1948, which provides health insurance and disability benefits. It integrates the Employees' Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952, which manages retirement savings. It encompasses 6 additional legislative acts related to various critical aspects of Social Security protection. Objectives and Social Security organizations. Objectives of the Code. The Code on Social Security, 2020 aims to amend and consolidate existing labor laws relating to Social Security, with the broader goal of extending benefits to all employees and workers across both organized and unorganized sectors. It encompasses diverse worker categories including self-employed, home-based, wage, migrant, unorganized sector, gig, and platform workers, providing them access to comprehensive Social Security schemes such as life and disability insurance, health and maternity benefits, and provident fund provisions. Social Security organizations. The Code establishes the following key administrative bodies: Central Board of Trustees of Employees Provident Fund, Employees State Insurance Corporation, National Social Security Board for Unorganized Workers, State Unorganized Workers Social Security Board, State Building and Other Construction, Workers' Welfare Boards. Coverage options and exemptions. The Code provides the following comprehensive framework for coverage options and exemptions. Voluntary coverage. The Central Provident Fund Commissioner has the authority to approve voluntary coverage under Section 1(5) for establishments seeking optional participation. Employer-employee agreement. Coverage may be determined through a formal agreement between the employer and the majority of employees, ensuring democratic decision-making. Time restrictions. Establishments must remain under Chapter 3 coverage for a minimum period of 5 years before applying for any exemption. Compliance requirements. Prior to application consideration, all statutory returns must be filed, and outstanding dues must be fully settled to demonstrate a good compliance history. Grounds for exemption from EPF and ESIC. Similar benefits. Establishments providing benefits substantially similar or superior to those granted under ESI and EPF chapters. Compliance history. Establishment has been complying with all provisions for 3 consecutive years without any defaults. Minimum members. Organization must have at least 500 contributory members. Financial requirements. Cumulative balance in members' accounts must be 50 crore rupees or more, with a positive net worth maintained during the previous 3 years. ESI benefits and gratuity coverage. ESI benefits for single employee establishments, hazardous occupations. The provisions and benefits of Chapter 4, ESI benefits, extend to establishments with even a single employee if they operate in hazardous or life-threatening occupations as notified by the central government. Worker protection. This critical provision ensures that workers in small establishments facing significant occupational risks receive comprehensive health and insurance protection. Gratuity coverage. The chapter on gratuity applies to the following establishments: industrial establishments, all factories, mines, oil fields, plantations, ports, and railway companies regardless of size. Commercial establishments, shops or establishments employing 10 or more workers. Notified establishments. Any additional establishments specifically notified by the appropriate government for gratuity coverage. Relaxation of gratuity eligibility. The standard 5-year service requirement for gratuity can't be relaxed under the following specific circumstances: death or disablement. When an employee suffers death or disability due to an accident or disease, the 5-year continuous service requirement is waived entirely. 1. Fixed-term employment. Employees under fixed-term contracts become eligible for gratuity on a pro rata basis upon completion of their contract period, regardless of the 5-year threshold. 2. Special circumstances. Additional exceptions may apply during events specifically notified by the central government. 3. Working journalists, as defined under Clause F of Section 2 of the Working Journalists and Other Newspaper Employees, Conditions of Service, and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1955, benefit from a reduced eligibility period. For this category of employees, the continuous service requirement is only 3 years instead of the standard 5 years. Building workers registration and benefits registration eligibility. Building workers who are between 18 and 60 years of age and have completed at least 90 days of construction work during the previous 12 months are eligible for registration as beneficiaries. This registration is processed by authorized officers of the Building Workers Welfare Board. Cessation as beneficiary. A registered building worker ceases to be a beneficiary under the Code on Social Security, 2020 when they either reach 60 years of age or fail to engage in building or construction work for at least 90 days in a year. Migrant workers benefits. Building workers who migrate between states are entitled to benefits from the board operating in their current work jurisdiction. The responsibility for providing these benefits lies with the board in the state where they are presently employed. Gig workers, platform workers, and unorganized workers. Definitions under the Code. Gig worker: an individual who performs work or participates in income-generating activities outside the traditional employer-employee relationship, typically working on short-term contracts or freelance arrangements. Platform worker: an individual who accesses work through digital platforms where organizations or individuals connect to provide specific services or solve particular problems in exchange for payment. This work arrangement exists outside the conventional employer-employee framework. Unorganized worker encompasses various categories including home-based workers, self-employed individuals, and wage workers in the unorganized sector. This definition also extends to workers in the organized sector who are not covered by the Industrial Disputes Act 1947 or Chapters 3 to 7 of the Code on Social Security, 2020.
The Code on Wages, 2019 FAQs on the Code on Wages, 2019. 1. How many exiting acts have been subsumed under the Code on Wages, 2019, and what are those? Ends 4 acts, namely, Payment of Wages Act, 1936, Minimum Wages Act, 1948, Payment of Bonus Act, 1965, and the Equal Remuneration Act, 1976. 2. What are the fundamental reforms introduced under the Code on Wages, 2019? Ends. The fundamental reforms introduced under the Code on Wages, 2019 include: 1. Universalizes provisions of minimum wages and timely payment of wages. 2. Removes multiplicity of definitions and authorities. 3. Changes the role of inspector to inspector-cum-facilitator. 3. Does the Code on Wages, 2019 retain the concept of scheduled employment? Ends. No. 4. Whether the persons doing the supervisory, managerial, and administrative work in an establishment are covered within the definition of employee as defined under the Code on Wages, 2019? Ends. Yes. 5. Who is an employer in relation to an establishment, which is a factory as per the provisions of Code on Wages, 2019? Ends. The occupier of the factory, and where a person has been named as a manager of the factory, the person so named, as per the relevant provisions of the Factories Act 1948. 6. Does the Code on Wages, 2019 permit allow discrimination in an establishment or any unit thereof among the employees on the grounds of gender in matters relating to wages by the same employer in respect of the same or similar nature of work done by an employee? Ends. No. 7. What is meant by same work or work of a similar nature in the context of Code on Wages, 2019? Ends. Same work or work of a similar nature means the work in respect of which the skill, effort, experience, and responsibility required are the same, when performed under similar working conditions by employees, and the differences, if any, are not of practical importance in relation to the terms and conditions of employment. 8. What are the 2 methods for fixation or revision of minimum rates of wages under the Code on Wages, 2019? Ends. I. Appointment of as many committees as deemed fit by the appropriate government to hold inquiry and make recommendations. 2. Publication of notification of its proposals for the information of the persons likely to be affected by such notification. 9. What are the components included in the definition of wages as per the Code on Wages, 2019? Ends. The components included in the definition of wages as per the Code on Wages, 2019 are: 1. Basic pay, 2. Dearness allowance, and 3. Retaining allowance, if any. 10. Does the Code on Wages, 2019 provide for fixation of floor wage by the central government, and what purpose does it serve? Ends. Yes. The Code on Wages, 2019 provides for the same. As per Section 9(1) of the Code, the power for the same has been given to the central government, which has to take into account minimum living standards of a worker in the manner as prescribed, and different floor wage may be fixed for different geographical areas. Section 9(2) of the Code provides that the minimum rates of wages fixed by the appropriate government under Section 6 of the Code shall not be less than the floor wage fixed by the central government. 11. What is the rate of payment of wages for the overtime work put in by an employee whose minimum rate of wages has been fixed under the Code on Wages, 2019 by the hour, by the day of by such a longer wage period as may be prescribed, and not less than twice the normal rate of wages. Section 14 of the Code on Wages, 2019, 12. What are the different wage periods under the Code on Wages, 2019, in case of the employees working on time work basis, and in case of the employees working on time work basis, there are 4 possible wage periods, i.e. daily, 2 weekly, 3 fortnightly, and I monthly, subject to the condition that no wage period in respect of an employee shall be more than a month. 13. What is the time limit for payment of wages in normal situations in respect of the employees working on time work basis as per the Code on Wages, 2019? And the time limit is as follows. The payment to the employees working on daily basis has to be made at the end of the shift. 2. The payment to the employees working on weekly basis has to be made on the last working day of week, that is to say, before the weekly holiday. 3. The payment to the employees working on fortnightly basis has to be made before the end of the second day after the end of the fortnight. 5. The payment to the employees working on monthly basis has to be made before the expiry of the 7th day of the succeeding month. Further, where an employee has been removed or dismissed from service, or retrenched or has resigned from service, or become unemployed due to closure of the establishment, the wages payable to him shall be paid within 2 working days of his removal, dismissal, retrenchment, or, as the case may be, his resignation. 14. What is the time limit set under the Code on Wages to determine the claim by the authority? ANS, 3 month. 15. What is the compensation which can be awarded by the claim authority under the Code on Wages, 2019, in addition to the claim determined by the authority in case of payment of less than the notified minimum wage under the Code, ANS, up to 10 times of the determined claim? 16. What is the amount of maximum fine that can be imposed on the employer for paying less than the due wages for the first time, as per the Code on Wages? ANS, 50,000 rupees. 17. As per the Code on Wages, 2019, what would be the maximum representation of the independent members in the central and state advisory boards? ANS, 1/3 of total members. 18. What is the maximum penalty that can be imposed on an employer having been convicted of an offense of paying less than the due wages, and again being found guilty of the same offense within 5 years from the date of the first or subsequent offense? ANS, imprisonment extending up to 3 months, or fine up to rupees 1 lakh, or both. 19. Which type of offense committed by the employer can be compounded by the gazetted officer as per the Code on Wages, 2019? ANS, offense punishable with fine only. 20. What is the amount sum for which the offense committed by the employer can be compounded by the gazetted officer as per the Code on Wages, 2019? ANS, an amount sum of 50% of the maximum fine provided for such offense. The Code on Social Security, 2020. FAQs on the Code on Social Security, 2021. How is the concept of Social Security defined under the Code on Social Security, 2020? ANS, Social Security means the measures of protection afforded to employees, inclusive of unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers, to ensure access to health care, and to provide income security, particularly in cases of old age, unemployment, sickness, invalidity, work injury, maternity, or loss of a breadwinner, by means of rights conferred on them, and schemes framed under the Code on Social Security, 2022. How many legislations does the Code on Social Security, 2020 subsume amalgamate, and what are those? ANS, the Code on Social Security, 2020 subsumes 9 central labor legislations, i.e., the Employees Compensation Act, 1923, the Employees State Insurance Act, 1948, the Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952, the Employment Exchanges Compulsory Notification of Vacancies Act, 1959, the Maternity Benefit Act, 1961, the Payment of Gratuity Act, 1972, the Cine Workers Welfare Fund Act, 1981, the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act, 1996, and the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, 2008. 3. What is the objective of the Code on Social Security, 2020? ANS, the objective of the Code on Social Security, 2020 is to amend and consolidate the existing labor laws relating to Social Security with the wider goal of extending Social Security benefits to all employees and workers irrespective of belonging to the organized or unorganized sector. The Code on Social Security, 2020 brings, within itself the self-employed workers, home workers, wage workers, migrant workers, the workers in the unorganized sector, gig workers and platform workers, for the purpose of Social Security schemes, including life insurance and disability insurance, health and maternity benefits, Provident Fund 4, which are the Social Security institutions envisaged under the Code on Social Security, 2020, and Section 279 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 illustrates on Social Security organizations. It include the Central Board of Trustees of Employees Provident Fund constituted under Section 4, B. The Employees State Insurance Corporation constituted under Section 5, C. The National Social Security Board for Unorganized Workers constituted under Section 6, D. The State Unorganized Workers Social Security Board constituted under Section 6, E. The State Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Boards constituted under Section 7, and F. Any other organization or special purpose vehicle declared to be the Social Security organization by the central government. 5. Is there an option to opt out or to opt in regarding coverage of establishments regarding EPF and ESI chapters under the Code on Social Security, 2020? ANS, yes, Central Provident Fund Commissioner, CPFC, can permit voluntary coverage under Sec 1, 5, of the Code on Social Security, 2020. Move-out option is available and Rule 3 procedure is to be followed. Both the situations are based on agreement between employer and majority of employees. A 60 days time limit is provided under the Code on Social Security, 2020 to decide on the same, or else there is a deemed provision, application is deemed as permitted, applicable, no such application, opting in opting out, shall be made by the employer of the establishment before 5 years of such coverage under provisions of Chapter 3 of the Code on Social Security, 2020. No such application shall be entertained unless the employer has furnished all statutory returns, paid all statutory dues under the Code on Social Security, 2020, and submitted a self-certification to that effect along with the application. As far as the chapter on ESI Chapter 4 is concerned, application of the same kind is to be decided upon by the Director General of Corporation. Rule 3 applies. Here too, 60 days time limit is provided for decision. Sec 1, 7. And proviso is applicable in this context. 6. Can there be any grounds where an exemption of establishments from the applicability of Chapter 3 EPF and Chapter IV, ESIC, is entertained under the Code on Social Security, 2020? ANS, yes. The grounds of exemption are under Section 143 read, with Rule 60 of the Code on Social Security, 2020. A. Establishment are in receipt of benefits substantially similar or superior to the benefits granted UEC and EPF chapters. B. The establishment seeking exemption shall make an application electronically or otherwise. C. The establishment has been complying with the provisions of Chapter 3 and IV equals for a period of 3 years continuously immediately before making the application, and has not defaulted in payment of contribution payable under the respective chapters during such period. D. Have minimum 500 contributory members for the purposes of Chapter 3 and IV of the Code on Social Security, 2020, as the case may be, on the date of such application. E. The establishment seeking exemption from the provisions of the Provident Fund Scheme, or the Pension Scheme, should have a cumulative balance in members' account of Rs 50 crore or more in respect of the scheme from which exemption is sought. F. For the purposes EPF, the establishment shall furnish consent of majority of the employees for seeking exemption under Section 143 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 G. The establishment seeking exemption should have a positive net worth during each of the last 3 years before the date of application. H. The establishment must have seated the odd-her number of each of the member in the respective member's account for the purposes of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, as the case may be, of the Code on Social Security, 2020 in the respective database. I. For the purposes of Chapter 3 of the Code on Social Security, 2020, the establishment shall provide facilities for online claim settlement and has an online portal for grievance resolution to provide linkages with that of Employees Provident Fund Organization within 90 days of grant of exemption. 7. Can the provisions and benefits of Chapter 4, ESI benefits, be made applicable to establishments employing a single employee? ANS, yes, it can be made applicable to hazardous or life-threatening occupation as notified by the central government, in which even a single employee is employed. 8. What is Employee State Insurance Society as mentioned in the Code on Social Security, 2020? Ans. The state government may establish such organization as an employee state insurance society, which shall serve as a managerial and healthcare body, in terms of subsection 5 of Section 40 of the Code on Social Security, 2020. The society shall consist of the governing body, tripartite, the executive committee, the chief executive officer, CEO, and the Secretariat. The society shall be registered under the State-Specific Societies Registration Act and the States-Specific Public Trust Act 9, which establishments are covered under the chapter on gratuity under the Code on Social Security, 2020. Ans. The chapter on gratuity is applicable to every factory, mine, oil field, plantation, port and railway company, and b. every shop or establishment in which 10 or more employees are employed, or were employed, on any day of the preceding 12 months, and c. such shops or establishments as may be notified by the appropriate government from time to time. 10. What are the situations under which the gratuity eligibility of completion of 5 years of unblemished service can be relaxed under the Code on Social Security, 2020? Ans. There are 3 situations generally to be noted wherein the 5-year period is relaxed. They are: a. On the death or disablement of employee due to accident or disease, b. on termination of his contract period under fixed-term employment, pro rata basis, or c. on happening of any such event as may be notified by the central government. Further, there is special relaxation in case of working journalist as defined in Clause F of Section 2 of the Working Journalists and Other Newspaper Employees, Condition of Service and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1955. Instead of 5 years, it is 3 years that needs to be completed. 11. Which are the kinds of building other construction works that are excluded from the chapter on Social Security aspects under Chapter 9 of the Code on Social Security, 2020. Ans. The excluded works as per Section 2, 6, of the Code on Social Security, 2020 are any building or other construction work, which is related to any factory, or mine, or any building, or other construction work employing less than 10 workers in the preceding 12 months, or where such work is related to own residential purposes, of an individual or group of individuals for their own residence, and the total cost of such work does not exceed 50 lakhs rupees, or such higher amount, and employing more than such number of workers as may be notified by the appropriate government. 12. What is the eligibility criteria fixed for building workers under the Code on Social Security, 2020 for registration as beneficiaries, and the incidence of cessation as beneficiary? Ans. Section 106 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 discusses about registration of workers. It is done electronically. Registered workers are issued with identity cards, making them eligible to receive benefits out of the prescribed schemes notified. It is the responsibility of the state government and the State Building Workers Welfare Board to get the workers registered. As per the Code under Section 106, every building worker who has completed 18 years of age, but has not completed 60 years of age, and who has been engaged in any building or other construction work for not less than 90 days during the preceding 12 months, shall be registered by the officer authorized by the Building Workers Welfare Board as a beneficiary. Cessation as beneficiary is discussed under Section 107 of the Code on Social Security, 2020. A building worker who has been registered as a beneficiary under the Code on Social Security, 2020 shall cease to be a beneficiary when he attains the age of 60 years, or when he is not engaged in building or other construction work for not less than 90 days in a year. 13. Can a building worker who migrates from one state to the another get his benefits under the Code on Social Security, 2020? If yes, from where? Ans. Yes, where a building worker migrates from one state to another, he shall be entitled to get benefits from the board in whose jurisdiction he is currently working, and such board shall be responsible for providing such benefits to such workers. 14. Who is an aggregator, which all kinds of aggregators are referred to under the 7th schedule attached to the Code on Social Security, 2020. Ans. Section 2.2 of the Code defines aggregator as the digital intermediary, or a marketplace for a buyer or user of a service to connect with the seller or the service provider. The aggregators listed under Schedule 7 are 1. Ride-sharing services. 2. Food and grocery delivery services. 3. Logistics services. 4. E-marketplace, both marketplace and inventory model for wholesale retail sale of goods and/or services. B2B, B2C. 5. Professional services provider. 6. Healthcare. 7. Travel and hospitality. 8. Content and media services. And 9. Any other goods and services provider. Platform 15. Who can amend the schedules attached with the Code on Social Security, 2020 and how? ANS, Section 152. 1. Of the Code on Social Security, 2020 describes the procedure regarding the same. The central government may, by notification, amend the first schedule, fourth schedule, fifth schedule, sixth schedule, and seventh schedule, by way of addition or deletion therein, and upon such addition or deletion, the schedules shall stand to have been amended accordingly. The appropriate government may, by notification, amend the second schedule and third schedule by way of addition therein, and not otherwise, and upon such addition, the schedules shall stand to have been amended accordingly. 16. What is fixed-term employment under the Code on Social Security, 2020? ANS. It means the engagement of an employee on the basis of a written contract of employment for a fixed period. The hours of work, wages, allowances, and other benefits of a fixed-term employee shall not be less than that of a permanent employee doing the same work, or work of a similar nature, and such an employee shall be eligible for all benefits, under any law for the time being in force, available to a permanent employee proportionately according to the period of service rendered by him, her, even if the period of employment does not extend to the required qualifying period of employment, i.e., gratuity eligibility of 5 years of service. 17. Who will be considered as interstate migrant worker under the Code on Social Security, 2020? ANS. Section 241 defines an interstate migrant worker under the Code on Social Security, 2020, and means a person who is employed in an establishment and who, has been recruited directly by the employer or indirectly through contractor in one state for employment in such establishment situated in another state, or 2, has come on his own from one state and obtained employment in an establishment of another state destination state, or has subsequently changed the establishment within the destination state, under an agreement or other arrangement for such employment and drawing wages not exceeding 18,000 rupees per month, or such higher amount as may be notified by the central government from time to time. 18. Who is an unorganized worker under the Code on Social Security, 2020. ANS. Section 286 defines an unorganized worker inclusive of a home-based worker, self-employed worker, or a wage worker in the unorganized sector, and includes a worker in the organized sector who is not covered by the Industrial Disputes Act, 1947, or Chapters 3, Chapter on EPF to 7, Chapter on Employees' Compensation of the Code on Social Security, 2020-19, who is a gig worker and platform worker under the Code on Social Security, 2020. ANS. Section 235 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 defines gig worker to mean a person who performs work or participates in a work arrangement and earns from such activities outside of traditional employer-employee relationship. Section 261 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 defines platform worker to mean a person engaged in or undertaking platform work, and Section 260 defines the platform work to mean a work arrangement outside of a traditional employer-employee relationship in which organizations or individuals use an online platform to access other organizations or individuals to solve specific problems or to provide specific services or any such other activities, which may be notified by the central government in exchange for payment. 20. What is the procedure envisaged under the Code on Social Security, 2020, to get the registration of unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers done? ANS. Section 113 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 discusses the same. Rule 51 and 2 provides for the procedure involved in the same. As per these provisions, every unorganized worker, gig worker, or platform worker shall be required to be registered for the purposes of Chapter 9, Social Security for unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers, subject to the fulfillment of the following conditions, namely, a. He has completed 16 years of age, or such age as may be prescribed by the central government. b. He has submitted a self-declaration electronically, or otherwise in such form, and in such manner containing such information as may be prescribed by the central government. Every eligible unorganized worker, gig worker, or platform worker shall make an application for registration in a prescribed format along with such documents, including her number as may be prescribed by the central government, and such worker shall be assigned a distinguishable number to his application. The system of electronic registration maintained by the appropriate government shall also provide for self-registration by any such worker in such manner as may be prescribed by the central government. A registered unorganized worker, gig worker, or platform worker alone shall be eligible to avail the benefit of the concerned scheme framed under the Code on Social Security, 2020. The central government, or as the case may be, the state government shall make such contribution in a scheme as may be specified to that effect. 21. Is any contribution mandatorily prescribed from the aggregators under the Code on Social Security, 2020? Ans. Yes. Sec. 114, 4. Provides for the contribution to be collected from aggregators. As per the Code, they will have to contribute 1 to 2% of their annual turnover for Social Security, which will not exceed 5% of the amount paid or payable by an aggregator to gig workers and platform workers. Rule 51, 3, of the Code on Social Security, 2020 discusses on the nuances about the same.
(22) What are the functions of National and State Social Security Board under the Code on Social Security, 2020? Ans. The functions of the National Social Security Board are: recommend to the central government for framing suitable schemes for different sections of unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. B. Advise the central government on such matters arising out of the administration of this code as may be referred to it. C. Monitor such social welfare schemes for unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers as are administered by the central government. D. Review the record-keeping functions performed at the state level. E. Review the expenditure from the fund and account. And F. Undertake such other functions as are assigned to it by the central government from time to time. The State Board does have similar functions at the state level. 23. What are the functions of state building workers' welfare boards under the Code on Social Security, 2020? Ans. The functions of state building workers' welfare boards are to provide death and disability benefits to a beneficiary or his dependents. B. Make payment of pension to the beneficiaries who have completed the age of 60 years. C. Pay such amount in connection with premium for group insurance scheme of the beneficiaries as may be prescribed by the appropriate government. D. Frame educational schemes for the benefit of children of the beneficiaries as may be prescribed by the appropriate government. E. Meet such medical expenses for treatment of major ailments of a beneficiary or such dependent as may be prescribed by the appropriate government. F. Make payment of maternity benefit to the beneficiaries. G. Frame skill development and awareness schemes for the beneficiaries. H. Provide transit accommodation or hostel facility to the beneficiaries. I. Formulation of any other welfare scheme for the building worker beneficiaries by state government in concurrence with the central government. And J. Make provision and improvement of such other welfare measures and facilities as may be prescribed by the central government. 24. What are the types of schemes to be notified by the central government under the Chapter 3 of the Code on Social Security, 2020? Ans. The central government may by notification frame a scheme to be called the Employees Provident Fund Scheme, for which the provident funds shall be established under the Chapter 3, dealing with EPF, for employees or for any class of employees, and specify the establishments or class of establishments to which they said scheme shall apply. B. Frame a scheme to be called the Employees Pension Scheme for the purpose of providing for I. Superannuation pension, retiring pension, or permanent total disablement pension to the employees of any establishment or class of establishments to which this chapter applies. 2. Widow or widower's pension, children pension, or orphan pension payable to the beneficiaries of such employees. And 3. Nominee pension. C. Frame a scheme to be called the Employees Deposit-Linked Insurance Scheme for the purpose of providing life insurance benefits to the employees of any establishment or class of establishments to which Chapter 3, dealing with EPF applies. D. Frame any other scheme or schemes for the purposes of providing Social Security benefits under this code to self-employed workers or any other class of persons. 25. Discuss on employers' liability as prescribed under the Code on Social Security, 2020. Ans. Employer is to maintain records and registers containing particulars such as 1. Number of days for which work performed by employees. 2. Number of hours of work performed by the employees. 3. Wage paid, IV, leave wages, wages for overtime work and attendance, the employee's identification number, by whatever nomenclature it may be called. 6. Number of dangerous occurrences, accidents, injuries in respect of which compensation has been paid by the employer and the amount of such compensation relating to Chapter 4 and Chapter 7, respectively. 7. Statutory deductions made by employer from the wages of an employee in respect of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. 8. Details as to cess paid in respect of building, and other construction work. A total number of employees, regular, contractual, or fixed-term employment, on the day specified. J. Persons recruited during a particular period. Xi. Occupational details of the employees, and Xi. Vacancies for which suitable candidates were not available during the specified period. The employer is mandated to a. Display notices at the workplaces of the employees in such manner and form as may be prescribed by the appropriate government. B. Issue wage slips to the employees, in electronic forms or otherwise, and C. File such return electronically or otherwise to such officer or authority in such manner, and during such periods as may be prescribed by the appropriate government. 26. What is compounding of offenses under the Code on Social Security, 2020? What is the procedure involved? ANS. Section 138 of the Code on Social Security, 2020, and corresponding Rule 56 gets applied here. 1. The officer authorized by the central government by notification for the purposes of compounding of offenses shall issue electronically a compounding notice in Form 24 for the offenses for which are compoundable under Section 138. 2. The person so noticed may apply in Part 3 of the Form 24 to the officer electronically and deposit the entire compounding amount by electronic transfer or otherwise within 15 days of the receipt of the notice. 3. The compounding officer shall issue a composition certificate in Part IB of Form 24 within 10 days of receipt of the composition amount to such person from whom such amount has been received in satisfaction of the composition notice. 4. If a person so noticed fails to deposit the composition amount within the prescribed time, the prosecution shall be instituted before the competent court, or the offense in respect of which the compounding notice was issued, against such person. 5. Composition after institution of prosecution. The court may compound any compoundable offense at any time after filing of a complaint under Section 138 of the Code on Social Security, 2020. B. The provisions of Section 320 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 of Criminal Procedure, 1973, shall apply to such compositions. 27. What is a career center under the Code on Social Security, 2020? ANS. Career centers will replace employment exchanges, and it includes any office, including employment exchange, place or portal, established and maintained in the manner prescribed by the central government for providing such career services, including registration, collection, and furnishing of information, either by the keeping of registers or otherwise, manually, digitally, virtually, or through any other mode, as may be prescribed by the central government, which may, inter alia, relate generally or specifically to I. Persons who seek to employ employees. 2. Persons who seek employment. 3. Occurrence of vacancies. And I. Persons who seek vocational guidance and career counseling or guidance to start self-employment. 28. Is there any special power vested with the central government during times of pandemic or disaster? ANS. Yes. Section 144 of the Code on Social Security, 2020 details out the power of central government by order, defer or reduce employer's contribution, or employee's contribution, or both, payable under Chapter 3 or Chapter 4, as the case may be, for a period up to 3 months at a time, in respect of establishment to which Chapter 3 or Chapter 4, as the case may be, applies, for whole of India or part thereof in the event of pandemic, endemic or national disaster. This is applicable to EPF and ESI contributions alone. 29. What is Social Security Fund? ANS. The Code mandates setting up of Social Security Fund both at central and state level. Section 141. 1. Of the Code on Social Security, 2020 describes that here shall be Industrial Relations Code, 2023, which chapter of the Industrial Code, 2020 relates to the matters pertaining to the standing orders. ANS. Chapter 4 of the Industrial Code, 2020. Q4. Total how many schedules does the Industrial Relations Code, 2020 have? And what are those? ANS. 3 schedules. The first schedule concerning the matters to be providing in standing orders under the Code, the second schedule concerning the unfair labor practices, and the third schedule concerning conditions of service for change of which notice is to be given. 5. What is the new term in the Industrial Code, 2020 for the term workman as defined and used in Section 2(s) of the Industrial Dispute Act, 1947, ANS. The new term for the term workman as defined and used in Section 2(s) of the Industrial Dispute Act, 1947 under the Industrial Code, 2020 as worker. Q6. Whether the definition of industry under the Industrial Relations Code, 2020 inter alia include institutions owned or management by organizations substantially engaged in any charitable, social, or philanthropic services, and no 7, whether as per the Industrial Code, 2020 termination of the services of a worker as a result of tenure of fixed-term employment, or termination of the service of a worker on the ground of continued ill health fall within the scope of the definition of retrenchment as defined under Section 2, ZH of the Code, and no, as both the situations have been excluded from the scope of the definition of retrenchment. 8. What are the bipartite forums provided under the Industrial Code, 2020 for the purpose of securing and preserving amity and harmonious industrial relations between the employer and workers in industrial establishments, and resolution of disputes arising out of individual grievances, and the bipartite forums provided under the Industrial Code, 2020 for the purpose of securing and preserving amity and harmonious industrial relations between the employer and workers in industrial establishment and resolution of disputes arising out of individual grievances include Works Committee and Grievance Redressal Committee. Q9. What is the requirement in terms of minimum number of workers for the purpose of constitution of Works Committee and Grievance Redressal Committee, and 100 workers for the purpose of constitution of Works Committee, and 20 workers for the purpose of constitution of Grievance Redressal Committee. 10. As per the Industrial Relations Code, 2020 concerted casual leave on a given day, by what percentage or workers employed in industry would be deemed as strike? Ans 50% or more. Q. 11. The maximum no of members in the Grievance Redressal Committee, GRC, which under the Industrial Disputes Act 1947, at present is 6, has been increased to how many members in the Industrial Relations Code, 2020? Ans 10 members. Q. 12. As per the Industrial Relations Code, 2020, the trade union having support of what percentage or more of the workers on the muster roll in an industrial establishment will be recognized as sole negotiation union, and the trade union having 51% or more workers on the muster roll in an industrial establishment. 13. What is the minimum support requirement in terms of percentage of workers for the representatives to be part of the negotiating council in an establishment having more than one trade union, in the absence of no union having 51% or more workers in its support, and 20% of the total workers on the muster roll of the establishment? Q. 14. The newly introduced provision of Worker Reskilling Fund in the Industrials Code, 2020 provides for contribution of an amount equal to how many days of wages, or such other days as may be notified by the central gov by the establishment to such fund in respect of every retrenched worker, and an amount equal to 15 days of wages, or such other days as may be notified by the central gov. Q. 15. What is the prescribed number of members under the Industrial Relations Code, 2020 for constitution of industrial tribunal, and 2 members consisting of 1 judicial member, and 1 member from the administrative side? Q. 16. Under the Industrial Relations Code, 2020, the power to impose penalty for offences punishable exclusively with fine has been given to the officers not below which rank of the Gov of India, or an officer of the equivalent rank in the state Gov appointed by the appropriate Gov, and under Secretary. Q. 17. Is it true that under the Industrial Relations Code, 2020, the disputes pertaining the registered trade unions have also been included within the jurisdiction of industrial tribunal? And yes. Q. 18. Whether as per the Industrial Relations Code, 2020, an employee worker engaged on fixed term employment contract would also be entitled to get retrenchment compensation, in addition to various terminal dues, and no. Q. 19. As per the Industrial Relations Code, 2020, any offense falling under the category of compoundable offense can be compounded for a sum of what percent of the fine prescribed for that offense, and 50% of the maximum fine, in case of offenses punishable only with fine, and 75% of the maximum fine, in case of the offenses punishable with fine, or imprisonment up to 1 year. The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions, OSH, and WC Code, 2020 FAQs on the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions, OSH, and WC Code, 2021. How many central labor laws have been subsumed under the Code on OSH and WC 2020? ANS. Total 13 central labor laws have been subsumed under the Code on OSH and WC 2022. Whether OSH and WC Code 2020 will apply on offices of central and state gov. ANS. The Code on OSH and WC 2020 will not apply on central and state gov offices, but will apply on contract labor employed through contractor in the premises. 3. Whether regularly employed employee of a contractor will be considered as contract labor, and regularly employed employee of a contractor will not be considered as contract labor if he is employed on mutually agreed term, with periodical increment and statutory benefits. 4. What is core activity? ANS. It is the activity for which establishment has been set up, and which is necessary and essential for the establishment. 5. Whether contract labor can be deployed on core activities. ANS. Ordinarily contract labor will not be deployed on core activities. 6. What is the threshold for number of contract laborers for an establishment for obtaining license under the OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Establishments employing 50 or more contract laborers will require to obtain license under the OSH and WC Code 2020. 7. What is the requirement of registration under the OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Establishment employing 10 or more employees need to be registered under the Code 8, who will be responsible for providing safety, health and welfare facilities to contract laborers. ANS. Principal employer will be responsible to ensure safety, health and welfare provisions to contract laborers. 9. What is the body prescribed under the Code for advising central government on administration of the OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. National Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board have been prescribed under the Code to advise central government in framing rules, regulations, etc. 10. What is threshold for number of workers for constituting safety committee in an establishment under OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Establishment employing 500 or more workers has to form safety committee consisting of representatives of management and workers. 11. What is threshold for wage ceiling for interstate migrant workers under the Code? ANS. Interstate migrant worker getting wages up to Rs. 18,000 per month will be covered under the OSH and WC Code 2020. 12. What additional benefits have been prescribed to a migrant worker under the OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Employer has to provide journey allowance once in a year for traveling to and fro native village, portability of public distribution system, and for migrant worker in construction work, portability of BOCWSS Fund 13. What is threshold for number of workers for providing canteen in an establishment as per the provisions of OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Establishment employing 100 or more workers including contract laborers has to provide canteen facilities. 14. What is the provision regarding creche facilities under the OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Establishment employing 50 or more workers has to provide creche facility for the children of employees. 15. What is provision in respect of formalization of employment under the OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Every employer of an establishment has to issue appointment letter to each and every employee employed by him. 16. What is the employer's liability towards health examination of employees as per the provisions of OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Every employer has to provide facilities for annual health checkup free of cost for the employees of prescribed age. 17. What are prescribed daily and weekly hours of work under the OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. The prescribed daily and weekly hours of work under the OSH and WC Code 2020 are 8 hours a day and 48 hours a week respectively. 18. What is the minimum criterion in terms of number of days for a worker to be eligible for annual leave with wages as per the provisions of OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. A worker should have worked for 180 or more days in a calendar year to be eligible for annual leave with wages. 19. Can a worker be deployed on overtime work without his or her consent as per the provisions of OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. No. Consent of a worker is necessary before deploying him or her on overtime work. 20. Can a woman employee be deployed on night shift as per the provisions of OSH and WC Code 2020? ANS. Yes, a woman employee can be deployed on night shift before 6 a.m. and after 7 p.m. after obtaining her consent and subject to her safety, health, and suitable working conditions. Overview of Indian Labor Codes. 2019.2020 Introduction. India's labor laws underwent significant reform with the enactment of 4 key codes between 2019 and 2020, consolidating and modernizing existing legislation. These codes aim to simplify regulations, enhance worker protection, and promote ease of doing business. The codes are the Code on Wages, 2019, the Code on Social Security, 2020, the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code, 2020, and the Industrial Relations Code, 2020. The Code on Wages 2019 Consolidation. This code consolidates 4 existing laws: the Payment of Wages Act 1936, the Minimum Wages Act 1948, the Payment of Bonus Act 1965, and the Equal Remuneration Act 1976. Objective: it aims to ensure timely payment of wages and establish a universal minimum wage framework across all sectors in India. Key definitions: employee encompasses individuals performing supervisory, managerial, and administrative functions. Employer, then for factories as the occupier or the designated factory manager, Equal remuneration. Prohibition. Explicitly prohibits gender-based wage discrimination for the same or similar work. Definition. Same work or work of a similar nature requires comparable skill, or experience, and responsibility under similar working conditions. Minimum wages. Fixation. The appropriate government establishes minimum wage rates for both time-based and piece rate work. Methods. Through committee inquiry or publication of proposals. Components. May include a basic wage rate, cost of living allowance, and the cash equivalent value of essential commodity concessions. Floor wage. Establishment. The central government establishes a wage based on minimum living standards. Compliance. Minimum wages set by central and state governments must meet or exceed this or.
Payment of wages. Mode. Wages must be disbursed through current coin, currency notes, check, direct bank deposit, or other electronic payment methods. Wage period. Employers are required to establish a wage period, daily, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, that cannot exceed 1 month. Time limit. Wages must be disbursed within legally prescribed timeframes to ensure timely compensation. Deductions. Limited to statutorily specified purposes, and cannot exceed FTY% of the employee's total wages. Payment of bonus. Eligibility. Any employee earning wages below the noted threshold, who has worked for at least 30 days in an accounting year. Minimum bonus. 8.33% of wages or 100 rupees, whichever is higher. Maximum bonus. 20% of wages, regardless of the allocable surplus. Advisory boards. Central Advisory Board, established by the central government, comprising representatives of employers, employees, independent members, and state governments. State Advisory Board. Each state government constitutes a state advisory board mirroring the composition of the central board. Claims and penalties. Claims can be led by employees, registered trade unions, or inspector-cum facilitators within 3 years. Authority may order compensation up to 10 times the claimed amount. Penalties. Underpayment of wages. Fine up to 50,000 rupees, repeated underpayment. Imprisonment up to 3 months and/or up to 100,000 rupees. Inspector-cum facilitator. Serves dual roles, advising employers and workers on compliance requirements, while also conducting establishment inspections. Code on Wages, Central, Rules, 2020. Streamlines wage-related compliance requirements across various sectors, superseding existing rules. The Code on Social Security, 2020 consolidation. This code consolidates 9 previous labor laws relating to Social Security and welfare in India. Objective to expand Social Security coverage to previously excluded workers, including gig workers, platform workers, and workers in the unorganized sector. Scope and applicability. Employees Provident Fund. Applies to all establishments with 20 or more employees. Employees State Insurance. Covers establishments employing 10 or more persons, as well as all hazardous occupations regardless of employee count. Gratuity extends to factories, mines, oilfields, plantations, ports, railways, and other establishments with 10 or more employees. Maternity benefit encompasses factories, mines, plantations, and establishments with 10 or more employees. Employees compensation covers employers and employees not included under the Employees State Insurance Chapter. Social Security Organizations. Central Board of Trustees. Manages the Employees Provident Fund and associated schemes. Employees State Insurance Corporation. Oversees the Employees State Insurance Scheme. National Social Security Board. Governs Social Security measures for unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. State Building Workers Welfare Board. Manages welfare funds for building and construction workers. Employees Provident Fund EPF. Contribution structure. Employers contribute 10% of wages, which can be increased to 12%, with employees contributing an equal amount. Fund administration. 3 distinct funds, Provident Fund, Pension Fund, and Insurance Fund, are professionally managed. Account portability. Workers can seamlessly transfer their accumulated balances when changing employers. Employees State Insurance. ESI, medical benefits, full medical care at ESI hospitals, dispensaries, and panel clinics. Sickness benefits, cash compensation at 70% of wages for up to 91 days during certain illness. Maternity benefits, paid leave and medical care for women employees during pregnancy and post-delivery period. Disablement benefits, financial support for temporary or permanent disabilities resulting from employment injuries, maternity benefits, paid leave, generous paid maternity leave of 26 weeks, medical bonus, financial support through a medical bonus of Rs. 3,500, nursing breaks, convenient nursing breaks until the child reaches 15 months of age, gratuity benefits. Employees receive gratuity payments upon reaching superannuation age, voluntary retirement, or death disablement. Employees' compensation. Employers are legally obligated to provide compensation for personal injuries sustained through workplace accidents. Building Workers' Welfare Fund. Financed through a construction cess collected from employers, unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. Social Security schemes. The central government formulates comprehensive schemes covering life and disability protection, health and maternity benefits, old age security, and educational assistance. Social Security Fund, a dedicated national reserve established to ensure sustainable funding. Registration system. Workers must complete registration to access benefits, with Aadhaar-based verification mandated. Aggregator contributions. Aggregators are required to contribute between 1.2% of their annual turnover to enhance Social Security schemes. Draft rules. The Ministry of Labor and Employment issued draft rules in 2020, superseding existing rules. The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, 2020 consolidation. This code consolidates 13 existing labor laws into a single, comprehensive statute. Objective: to modernize provisions for occupational safety, health, and working conditions across all sectors and establishments. Application scope. The code explicitly exempts OICs of the central government, state government, and any naval warship. Duties of employers. Employers must create and maintain hazard-free workplaces, provide free annual health examinations, and issue formal appointment letters. Employee responsibilities. Employees must exercise reasonable care for personal and collective safety, adhere to all prescribed safety requirements, and promptly report unsafe conditions. National and state boards. National Board. The central government establishes the National Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board to provide expert guidance. State Board. Each state government constitutes its own Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board. Health provisions. Comprehensive workplace standards including cleanliness protocols, adequate ventilation, and accessible drinking water. Safety measures. Critical safeguards encompassing proper illumination, gender-segregated sanitation facilities, and provision of appropriate personal protective equipment. Welfare facilities. Employee-centered amenities, including washing stations, secure changing areas, and child-friendly creche facilities. Working conditions. Legally protected work parameters establishing 8-hour workday limitations, guaranteed weekly rest days, and double-rate overtime payment. Special provisions for de-errant sectors. Contract labor. The code establishes a mandatory licensing system for contractors, while ensuring comprehensive welfare facilities for contract workers. Interstate migrant workers. Enhanced protections include suitable working conditions, journey allowance, and guaranteed access to public distribution system benefits. Mines, factories, and construction. Stringent safety provisions require the appointment of qualified managers, designated safety OICers, and established emergency rescue services. Inspection and enforcement. Inspector-cum-facilitator. The appropriate government appoints inspector-cum-facilitators with dual responsibilities. Inspection authority. Inspectors are empowered to enter workplace premises, conduct thorough examinations, and seize non-compliant records. Penalties. Code violations trigger monetary penalties ranging from 50,000 rupees to 5 rupees lakh, with imprisonment provisions for serious infractions. Ministry of Labor and Employment notification issued draft rules in 2020 streamlining regulation by consolidating multiple existing frameworks. The Industrial Relations Code, 2020 consolidation. This comprehensive legislation consolidates and modernizes laws governing trade unions, employment conditions in industrial establishments, and resolution of industrial disputes. Definitions. Appropriate government refers to the central government for establishments under its authority, and the state government for all other industrial establishments. Industry. Any systematic activity carried out through employer-worker cooperation for the production, supply, or distribution of goods or services. Worker. Any person employed in any industry performing manual, unskilled, skilled, technical, operational, clerical, or supervisory work. Bipartite forums. Works Committee, for establishments employing 100+ workers, to foster harmonious workplace relations. Grievance Redressal Committee, for industrial establishments with 20+ workers, to address and resolve individual grievances. Trade unions, registration. Any 7 or more members can form and apply for registration. Rights and immunities. Registered unions gain corporate status with perpetual succession. Recognition. Provisions exist for recognizing negotiating unions that have 51% or more worker support. Standing orders. Applicability. Mandatory for all industrial establishments employing 300 or more workers. Preparation and certification. Employers must draft standing orders based on model templates. Industrial disputes resolution mechanism. Bipartite discussions. Direct negotiations between employers and workers. Conciliation. Professional mediation by appointed conciliation officers. Arbitration. Voluntary submission of unresolved disputes to mutually agreed upon arbitrators. Adjudication. Final resolution through industrial tribunals or national industrial tribunals. LAOS. Retrenchment and closure. Establishment size categories. Small, fewer than 50 workers. Medium, 50.299 workers. Large, 300 plus workers. LAO provisions. Workers entitled to compensation at 50% of wages for up to 45 days. Small and medium establishments. Retrenchment provisions. 1 month notice or equivalent wages in lieu. Severance pay of 15 days wages per completed year of service. Small and medium establishments. Closure provisions. 90 days advance notice and explicit prior government permission. Large establishments. Strikes, lockouts and unfair labor practices. The code explicitly prohibits strikes and lockouts under certain circumstances. Ministry of Labor and Employment Notification. Proposed new comprehensive rules in 2020, replacing existing frameworks. In conclusion, the 4 labor codes represent a significant overhaul of India's labor laws, aiming to create a more streamlined, equitable, and efficient regulatory environment. While intended to enhance worker protection and promote ease of doing business, their implementation and impact continue to be subjects of discussion and analysis among stakeholders. Labor Code Reform in India Overview. India has consolidated several labor laws into 4 codes: wages, social security, occupational safety, and industrial relations. These aim to modernize labor regulations, expand worker protections, and promote ease of doing business. Code on Wages, 2019. Key provisions. Ensures minimum wages and timely payments for all employees, prohibits gender-based wage discrimination, and deems wages to include basic pay, dearness allowance, and retaining allowance. Enforcement. Establishes inspector-cum-facilitators and sets penalties for underpayment of wages. Code on Social Security, 2020. Expanded coverage. Extends Social Security benefits to unorganized, gig, and platform workers. Key schemes. Includes Employees Provident Fund, Employees State Insurance, Gratuity, and Maternity Benefits. Financial support. Mandates contributions from aggregators and establishes a Social Security Fund. Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, 2020. Consolidation. Integrates 13 labor laws related to workplace safety. Employer duties. Requires hazard-free workplaces, annual health examinations and appointment letters. Worker rights. Guarantees access to health and safety information. Industrial Relations Code, 2020. Bipartite forums. Establishes works committees and grievance redressal committees. Trade unions. Sets rules for registration and recognition. Dispute resolution. Provides mechanisms for conciliation, arbitration, and adjudication. These labor codes represent a significant overhaul of India's labor laws, aiming to create a more equitable and efficient system that balances the needs of both employers and employees. Labor law reforms in India. A summary of key codes. Introduction. India has enacted significant labor law reforms by consolidating existing laws into 4 comprehensive codes: the Code on Wages, 2019, the Code on Social Security, 2020, the Industrial Relations Code, 2020, and the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, 2020. These codes aim to simplify regulations, extend coverage, and promote ease of doing business. The Code on Wages, 2019 Core Consolidation. This code consolidates 4 acts: Payment of Wages Act, 1936, Minimum Wages Act, 1948, Payment of Bonus Act, 1965, and Equal Remuneration Act, 1976. Key objectives: universal coverage, extends minimum wage, and timely payment provisions to all employees, irrespective of sector or wage level. Simplified framework. Reduces complexity by harmonizing definitions and authorities. Facilitative enforcement. Transforms inspectors into facilitators to guide compliance. Equal remuneration. Prohibits gender-based wage discrimination for similar work. Wage components. Wages include basic pay, dearness allowance, and retaining allowance. Floor wage. The central government sets a wage based on minimum living standards, ensuring no state minimum wage falls below this level. Overtime pay. Overtime work must be compensated at twice the normal wage rate. Payment timelines. Wages must be paid daily, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, with specific deadlines. The Code on Social Security, 2020 Comprehensive Integration, integrates 9 laws, including those related to employees' compensation, state insurance, provident funds, maternity benefits, and gratuity. Expanded coverage extends Social Security to unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. Key provisions. Provident fund. Mandatory for establishments with 20-plus employees. State insurance. Covers healthcare for establishments with 10-plus employees. Gratuity. Rewards long service in specified establishments. Maternity benefit. Ensures paid leave and medical support for women. Social Security Fund. Establishes a fund for unorganized, gig, and platform workers. Registration. Workers must register using Aadhaar-based verification. The Industrial Relations Code, 2020 Legislative Amalgamation. Consolidates Trade Unions Act 1926, Industrial Employment Standing Orders, Act 1946, and Industrial Disputes Act 1947. Bipartite forums. Works Committee. Mandatory for establishments with 100-plus workers. Grievance Redressal Committee. Required for establishments with 20-plus workers. Trade Union Recognition. Unions with 51%-plus worker support gain exclusive negotiating rights. Standing Orders. Formal rules governing workplace operations. Mandatory for establishments with 300-plus workers. Dispute resolution. Includes conciliation, arbitration, and adjudication. Worker Re-skilling Fund. Requires employers to contribute for retrenched workers' skill development. The OSH Code, 2020 Regulatory Streamlining. Consolidates 13 laws related to occupational safety, health, and working conditions. Employer duties. Employers must maintain safe workplaces, provide health exams, and issue appointment letters. Employee responsibilities. Employees must follow safety rules and report unsafe conditions. Safety committees. Mandatory for establishments with 500-plus workers. Working hours. Standard 8-hour workday and 48-hour workweek. Special provisions. Includes tailored requirements for contract labor, migrant workers, and mine workers. In conclusion, the new labor codes represent a significant overhaul of India's labor laws, aiming to create a more streamlined, inclusive, and adaptable regulatory environment that balances the needs of both employers and employees, while promoting economic growth and social welfare. Briefing document. Analysis of provided sources. This briefing document summarizes the main themes, important ideas, and facts presented in the provided excerpts from various PDF documents. Quotes from the original sources are included where appropriate. Overall theme. The majority of these sources appear to be excerpts from official government gazettes and related documents concerning labor laws and regulations in India. They cover definitions, establishment classifications, rules regarding worker welfare, safety in specific industries, like mines and construction, licensing procedures, and the structure of relevant authorities. Key themes and ideas from specific sources. Administrative information. This excerpt indicates that the document is the Gazette of India Extraordinary, Part 2, with a specific registration number and date 2003. The note in Hindi and English states, separate paging is given to this part, in order that it may be filed as a separate compilation. This suggests it's a component of a larger set of official publications. Definitions within a code. It provides initial definitions within a code, including accounting year means the year commencing on the first day of April. B. Advisory board means the Central Advisory Board or, as the case may be, the State Advisory Board, constituted under Section 42. These definitions set the context for subsequent regulations within this code. Disqualification criteria for board membership. This section outlines reasons why a person would be disqualified from being nominated or serving as a member of a board. If he is declared to be of unsound mind by a competent court, or 2, if he is an undischarged insolvent, or 3, if before or after the commencement of the code, he has been convicted of an offense involving moral turpitude. It also states that the central government's decision on disqualification is final. 2, if any question arises whether a disqualification has been incurred under subrule 1, the decision of the central government thereon shall be final.
Employee Service Record Form. A section displays headings likely from an employee service book, including date of exit, reason for exit, mark of identification, photo specimen signature thumb impression, and remarks. It also includes a field with highly skilled, skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled, indicating a classification of worker skills. Wage slip format, Form V. This provides a template for a wage slip, including fields for the establishment's name and address, period, employee's personal details, name, father's spouse's name, designation, UAN, bank account no, and wage period. Banking regulation and reserve requirements. This excerpt discusses the allocation of profits by banking companies, referencing the Banking Regulation Act 1949, and directions from the Reserve Bank of India. It specifies the amount to be transferred to a reserve fund or other reserves, whichever is higher. For foreign banking companies, it details how dividends payable to preference shareholders are calculated based on their working funds in India relative to their total world working funds. Lists of unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled occupations. The document includes extensive lists of job titles categorized as gangman, gatingman, permanent way, etc. Likely unskilled, cook, dandy, etc. Potentially semi-skilled based on later context, and welder, upholsterer, etc. Potentially skilled. These lists are crucial for applying relevant labor regulations based on skill level. Classification of caretaker. It notes that the classification of caretaker varies by industry, being semi-skilled except in copper, chromite, and graphite mines. Act of Parliament and commencement. This source is identified as an Act of Parliament that received the President's assent on September 28, 2020, and was published for general information on September 29, 2020. It allows for different commencement dates for different provisions of the Code. Definition of appropriate government. It defines the appropriate government for different types of establishments, distinguishing between those under the central government's authority, e.g., railways, mines, major ports, banking companies, central SUs, and other establishments where it's the state government. Explanations clarify the definition of metro railway and the continued role of the central government for central SUs, even with reduced equity. Definition of dependent. This section provides a detailed definition of who constitutes a dependent for the purposes of the Code, including various familial relationships and conditions, e.g., minor illegitimate son, unmarried illegitimate daughter, widowed minor daughter-in-law, minor child of a predeceased son. An explanation clarifies that son, daughter, or child includes adopted children in specific subclauses. Definition of dock work. It defines dock work broadly, encompassing activities related to loading, unloading, movement, and storage of cargo at ports, including ship preparation, repairs, and maintenance within the docks. Definition of factory, partial. It lists several activities that constitute a factory, including pumping substances, generating power, printing processes, ship construction and breaking, and cold storage. Definition of occupier. This defines who is considered the occupier of a factory, generally the person who has ultimate control. A proviso addresses the specific case of ship repairs or maintenance in a hired dry dock, where the dock owner is the occupier for most purposes, except those directly related to the ship's condition, for which the ship owner is deemed the occupier. Definition of oil field. It references the definition of oil field in the Oil Fields, Regulation and Development Act 1948. Definition of plantation. It defines plantation based on the type of crop, tea, coffee, rubber, etc., and land size, 5 hectares or more, with provisions for contiguous smaller land parcels under the same management. It also allows state governments to declare smaller land used for such plants as plantations via notification. Provisions for schemes. This section discusses the creation, modification, and retrospective application of various schemes under the Code. It mentions that these schemes can address matters specified in Parts A, B, and C of the 5th Schedule. Functions and powers of the corporation. It outlines the corporation's ability to acquire, hold, and transfer property, invest funds, and establish medical education and training institutions. Students in these institutions may be required to furnish bonds for serving the corporation. These institutions can be run by the corporation or other government public sector entities. Appointment of competent authorities. It allows state governments to appoint competent authorities for specific areas, requiring certain qualifications and experience in personnel management, HR, industrial relations, legal affairs, etc. Contents of schemes and special purpose vehicles. It lists potential elements of schemes, such as scope, implementing authority, beneficiaries, resources, grievance redressal, and allows for the constitution of special purpose vehicles for implementation. Funding of state government schemes. It indicates that state government schemes can be wholly funded by the state government. Cognizance of offenses and prosecution. This section specifies which authorities are responsible for taking cognizance of offenses under different chapters of the Code and related rules. It mandates prior sanction from a notified authority, central government for chapters 3 and IV, appropriate government for others before prosecution. It also states that no court inferior to a metropolitan magistrate or a judicial magistrate of the first class can try offenses under this chapter. Multiple aggrieved persons can file a single complaint for the same or similar offenses within the court's jurisdiction. Opportunity for compliance before prosecution. It mandates that before initiating prosecution for offenses, excluding repeated violations within 3 years, the inspector-cum-facilitator or other notified officer must give the employer a written direction with a time period for compliance. If the employer complies, no prosecution will be initiated. Exclusions from employee definition. It excludes certain categories from the definition of employee, such as the master or seaman of certain ships and individuals employed in specific tasks related to ships within port limits, loading, unloading, fueling, etc. Wage calculation based on age. A table shows decreasing daily rates of wages based on age, starting from not more than 16 years. Loan provisions for the corporation. This excerpt outlines the purposes for which the corporation can obtain loans: land acquisition, building construction, repaying existing loans, other approved purposes. It specifies the sources of loans, central government or approved banks, and the terms and conditions associated with them, including the possibility of granting mortgages. Definition of authorized bank for government agency business. It defines this term by referencing a specific office memorandum from the Ministry of Finance. Procedure for crediting monies to banks. It mandates that all funds payable to the corporation must be credited to approved banks and not directly utilized. It also requires banks to provide monthly statements of deposits and withdrawals, which will be examined by the Director General. Powers of assessing officer, building and construction work. It grants assessing officers, empowered by the state government under Section 103 of the Code, specific powers, including entering establishments with prior approval to make inventories. Form for modifying nomination. It provides a template for an employee to modify a previously filed nomination, likely for benefits or entitlements. It includes certifications regarding family members and declarations about the absence of family or exclusion of a spouse. Format for vacancy reporting. A section outlines a format for reporting vacancies, including the number of vacancies to be filled by different categories: scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBC, OOS, ex-serviceman, persons with disabilities, women, others. It also includes fields for pay and allowances, repetition of administrative information. Similar to, this excerpt also starts with the publication details of the Gazette of India Extraordinary, dated September 29, 2020, indicating it's another official notification related to legislation passed on September 28, 2020. Extended definition of appropriate government. This provides a more comprehensive definition of appropriate government, specifically detailing establishments under central government authority, including controlled industries, railways, including metro, mines, oil fields, major ports, air and telecommunication services, banking and insurance companies established by central acts, central SUs, and their subsidiaries, autonomous bodies controlled by the central government, and contractors working for these entities. Detailed definition of banking company. It provides a more extensive list of entities included under the definition of banking company, referencing the Banking Regulation Act, 1949, and specifically naming various development and nationalized banks. Definition of district magistrate for mines. It clarifies the jurisdiction of the district magistrate in cases where a mine is situated across multiple districts, stating it will be the one authorized by the central government. Reiteration and expansion of dock work definition. It repeats the definition of dock work with the same subclauses as in detailed definition of mine. This provides a very specific and comprehensive definition of a mine, including not just the excavation itself, but also associated operations and infrastructure like construction for mine development, excluding general buildings, machinery operation, mineral loading, offices, welfare and safety services within the premises, excluding residential areas, and potential pollution. Definition of hazardous substance. It defines hazardous substance as any substance or quantity prescribed by the appropriate government that, due to its properties or handling, can cause physical or health hazards to humans or harm the environment. Definition of industrial premises. It defines industrial premises broadly as any non-private place where industry, trade, business, occupation, or manufacturing is carried on, including attached godowns. Further inclusions in mine definition. It elaborates further on what constitutes a mine, including shafts, levels, open cast workings, conveyors, railways, protective works, workshops, power stations solely for mine use, and premises used for depositing mining-related materials. Definition of minerals and motor transport undertaking. It defines minerals broadly and motor transport undertaking as one employing motor transport workers for carrying passengers or goods by road for hire or reward, including private carriers. Reiteration of occupier definition. Mines. It repeats the definition of occupier in relation to a mine, which includes the immediate proprietor, lessee, or occupier, and liquidators, receivers. It excludes those only receiving royalty or rent. Contractors and sublessees are subject to the code as if they were owners. Reiteration and expansion of plantation definition. It repeats and further elaborates on the definition of plantation, similar to, with emphasis on land size, and state government notifications. Composition of the Central Advisory Board. It outlines the structure of the Central Advisory Board, including various members from different government ministries, employer and employee organizations, independent persons, and special invitees. The Joint Secretary of the Ministry of Labor and Employment is the ex officio member secretary. The term of office for certain members is 3 years. Appointment of chief inspectors cum facilitators. It allows the appropriate government to appoint chief inspectors cum facilitators, potentially for a state, multiple states, or the entire country. Appointment of additional and other inspectors cum facilitators. It allows the appropriate government to appoint various levels of inspectors with specified powers within their jurisdiction. Powers of inspector cum facilitators. This section details the extensive powers of inspectors, including entering establishments, inspecting, examining records, conducting inquiries, taking measurements, photographs, videographs, recordings, and taking samples. Licensing of contractors. It specifies the authorities for licensing contractors supplying or engaging contract labor, with the central government designated authority for those operating in more than one state or all of India. Revocation or suspension of contractor licenses. It outlines the conditions under which a contractor's license can be revoked or suspended. Failure to comply with conditions or contravention of the code rules, after giving the contractor an opportunity to show cause. Instructions in mines. It mandates that instructions affecting statutory duties in a mine should generally be given through the manager. Exemptions from the code. Mines. It exempts certain mines, or parts thereof, from most provisions of the code, specifically those engaged in prospecting only, under certain conditions, and those extracting minor minerals, like canker, murram, ordinary sand, etc., subject to prescribed conditions. The central government retains the power to apply the code to these exempted mines. Licensing of industrial premises for Beatty and cigar workers. It requires employers to hold a valid license to use any place as industrial premises for Beatty and cigar work, issued under Section 119. Applications for licenses and renewals are to be made to the authority referred to in Section 119, in a form, and with fees prescribed by the state government. Conditions for granting or renewing licenses, Beatty and cigar. It outlines factors the licensing authority must consider, such as the suitability of the premises, welfare of labor, and public interest. Licenses are valid for 5 years and renewable. Renewals must be applied for at least 30 days before expiry. The authority must be satisfied about compliance with the code and rules before granting or renewing. State government directives on licensing, Beatty and cigar. It allows the state government to issue general directions to the licensing authority regarding the grant or renewal of licenses. Authority to grant or renew licenses, Beatty and cigar. Subject to Section 119 and other provisions, the licensing authority can grant or renew licenses with terms and conditions it determines, providing written reasons for refusal. Permitting work outside industrial premises, Beatty and tobacco. It allows the state government to permit wetting or cutting of Beatty or tobacco leaves by employees outside industrial premises upon employer application on behalf of employees, subject to prescribed conditions. Employers must maintain records of such work. Generally, other manufacturing processes must occur within the industrial premises. Cancellation of factory license for contravention, hazardous processes. It states that if the occupier of a factory contravenes provisions related to hazardous processes, disclosure of information, safety measures, their license under Section 79 is liable for cancellation. Obligations for factories with hazardous processes. Occupiers of such factories must, with prior approval from the chief inspector cum facilitator, establish and publicize measures for handling, transporting, storing, and disposing of hazardous substances. Penalties for offenses. This section outlines penalties for various contraventions, including failure to produce required documents, fines ranging from 50,000 rupees to 100,000 rupees, with higher penalties for repeated offenses up to 200,000 rupees. General penalties for contraventions. It specifies penalties for contravening any provision of the code, rules, regulations, or orders related to worker employment, including women, audiovisual workers, contract labor, and those under 18 in mines, with fines from 50,000 rupees to 100,000 rupees, and potential imprisonment up to 3 months, or fines up to 200,000 rupees, or both, for repeated offenses. Penalties for false records and statements. It outlines penalties for producing false records, counterfeiting documents, making false statements, falsifying plans, or knowingly providing false information in relation to compliance with the code, with fines up to 100,000 rupees, or imprisonment up to 6 months, or both, and higher penalties for repeated offenses. Deemed issuance of licenses. It includes provisions regarding the deemed issuance of licenses if certain conditions are met and emphasizes that the form of the license should be similar throughout India. Reasons must be provided for rejection of license applications. Transitional provision for existing licenses. Licenses obtained under previous central labor laws before the commencement of this code are deemed valid for their original period, but must be obtained afresh upon expiration. Rule-making powers of the appropriate government. It details the specific matters for which the appropriate government can make rules under the code, including defining other authorities, matters related to ship conditions, the form and conditions of registration certificates, prohibiting certain mine employment, ensuring mine safety, regulating workings near water bodies or public areas, and precautions against hazards in mines. Laying of rules made by state government. This likely outlines the procedure for how rules made by the state government are to be presented or laid before the state legislature. Repeal and savings clause. It mentions the repeal of various existing labor laws, referencing specific acts from 1948 to 1996. However, it includes a savings clause stating that anything done or any action taken under the repealed enactments will be deemed to have been done under the corresponding provisions of this code, and will remain in force until repealed by the central government, as long as they are not contrary to the new code. List of industries, likely hazardous. It provides a list of industrial gases, carbon, alkalis and acids, chromates, lead compounds, electrochemicals, electrothermal products, and nitrogenous compounds, suggesting these may be considered hazardous industries subject to specific regulations. Employee health and occupational details form. This appears to be a form for collecting information about employees' health, habits, smoking, tobacco, alcohol, history of major illnesses, occupational injuries, and current symptoms related to potential workplace exposures, dermatosis, mucosal irritation. Annual return format. Mines. The majority of this excerpt consists of detailed tables and formats for submitting annual returns for mines. These include sections 4. Employment and man days, requiring a breakdown of man days worked and average daily employment by gender, male, female, transgender, for both departmental and contractual workers, month-wise, and for the entire year. Production and stocks, coal mines. Detailed tables. Table A, for reporting opening stock, coal raised, underground, open cast, from other sources, total production, coal dispatched, internal consumption, closing stock, and value of output. It also requires reporting of overburdened stone handled and total material handled. Production and stocks, metalliferous mines. Similar detailed tables. Table B, for reporting mineral raised, raw and processed, opening and closing stocks, dispatches, metal extracted, if any, value of mineral produced, and material handled. Production and stocks, oil mines. A simpler table. Table C, for reporting oil and gas production, dispatches, to refinery, market, in-house, and closing stock. Explosives used. Mines, reporting consumption of permitted and non-permitted explosives and detonators. Machinery used. Mines, listing various types of machinery used in oil mines and their operational status. Accidents and dangerous occurrences. Mines, requiring detailed reporting of the number of accidents, fatalities, serious injuries, and injuries in underground, open cast, above ground, onshore, and offshore operations, along with the nature of dangerous occurrences. Contractor employee details form. It includes a section requesting details of employees working under a contractor, including their mobile number, employee register serial number, and registration details as a building and other construction worker. If applicable, it also asks for the period of employment and designation. Agreement between producer and audiovisual worker, Form 16. This provides a template for an agreement outlining the terms of engagement between a producer and an audiovisual worker, including fields for the date, names and addresses of both parties, and a statement that their heirs and legal representatives are included in the agreement. Repetition of administrative information. Similar to AN, this excerpt also begins with the publication details of the Gazette of India Extraordinary, dated September 29, 2020, concerning legislation passed on September 28, 2020. Selective definitions. It provides definitions for specific terms. F. Banking company. A reiteration of the definition found in W. Metro Railway, referencing the definition in the Metro Railways, Operation and Maintenance Act, 2002. X. Mine, referencing the definition in the Mines Act, 1952. Y. National Industrial Tribunal, defining it as constituted under Section 46 of this code. Z. Negotiating union or negotiating council, referencing its definition in Section 14 of this code. Z. Notification, defining it as a publication in the Official Gazette of India or a state. Powers of additional joint deputy registrars of trade unions. It clarifies that these officers can exercise the powers of the registrar of trade unions within their designated areas concerning trade unions with registered offices there. Model standing orders. It mandates that the central government shall make model standing orders related to conditions of service during the period before an establishment's own standing orders are certified. The model standing orders are deemed to be adopted. Saving clause for existing state laws on industrial disputes. It clarifies that the code does not affect existing state laws on the settlement of industrial disputes, but matters related to layoff and retrenchment will be determined according to the provisions of this code. Chapter 10 heading. It indicates the beginning of Chapter 10 special provisions relating to layoff, retrenchment, and closure in certain industrial establishments. Form of oath for tribunal members, Form V. This provides the text for the oath of office to be taken by a judicial or administrative member of a national industrial tribunal. The oath includes pledges to faithfully discharge duties, uphold the Constitution and laws, and act without fear, favor, affection, or ill will. 9.12, Combine Gamma PDF, and Speechify Word PDF. These sources contain no discernible text or relevant information for this analysis. They appear to be empty or contain non-textual content. In conclusion, these excerpts primarily focus on defining key terms within a new labor code, referenced as the code, outlining administrative structures and responsibilities, like the central and state advisory boards, inspectors, and licensing authorities, establishing rules and regulations for specific industries, mines, Beatty and cigar work, building and construction, detailing reporting requirements, annual returns for mines, and addressing procedural aspects like licensing and dispute resolution. The repeated publication details from the Gazette of India confirm that these are official government documents related to the enactment and implementation of labor legislation. The lists of job classifications highlight the importance of skill levels and labor regulations. Convert to text. Convert to source. Here is a detailed timeline of the main events and a cast of characters based on the provided sources. Timeline of main events. September 28, 2020. The Social Security Code 2020 receives the assent of the President of India. September 29, 2020. The Ministry of Law and Justice, Legislative Department, publishes the Social Security Code 2020 in the Official Gazette for general information. Date of commencement to be notified. The Social Security Code 2020 comes into force on a date or dates to be appointed by the central government through notification in the Official Gazette. Different dates may be appointed for different provisions. Source: ongoing future. The central government and state governments will constitute advisory boards, central and state advisory boards. Source: the central government and appropriate state governments will make rules, regulations, and schemes under the code. Source: model standing orders will be made by the central government, which will be deemed adopted by industrial establishments until their own standing orders are certified. Source: authorities will be appointed by the central and state governments for various purposes, including licensing of contractors, registration of establishments, and cognizance of offenses. Source: schemes for Social Security will be notified and implemented by the central and state governments. Source: existing licenses obtained under previous central labor laws will be deemed valid for their issued period, but will need to be obtained afresh upon expiration. Source: the central government may establish medical education institutions and training institutes. Source: cast of characters and brief bios. President of India gave assent to the Social Security Code 2020, making it an act of Parliament. Central government, the primary authority responsible for various aspects of the Social Security Code, including appointing the date of commencement of the code. Source: constituting the Central Advisory Board. Source: making rules and regulations under the code. Source: deciding on disqualifications for board membership. Source: specifying conditions for the corporation's acquisition and investment of property. Source: approving loans for the corporation. Source: notifying authorities for the purpose of prosecution of offenses. Source: making model standing orders. Source: potentially running medical education institutions established by the corporation. Source: designating authorities for licensing contractors operating in multiple states. or all of India. Source: state government. Another key authority with responsibilities under the code, including constituting the State Advisory Board. Source: defining the appropriate government for establishments not under central government authority. Source: making rules related to licensing of industrial premises for bidi and cigar workers. Source: appointing competent authorities for various purposes within the state. Source: notifying schemes for Social Security. Source: notifying officers for the prosecution of offenses, excluding those related to Chapters 3 and IV. Source: potentially running medical education institutions established by the corporation. Source: advisory board, central and state bodies constituted under Section 42 of the Code to advise the respective governments on matters related to Social Security. Source: corporation, an entity established under the Code with the power to acquire, hold, and transfer property, invest funds, and establish medical education institutions. Source: assessing officer, an officer who may be authorized by the state government to enter establishments for building and other construction work with prior approval. Source: inspector cum facilitator, an officer who, before initiating prosecution, gives an opportunity to the employer to comply with relevant provisions, notified by the central government for offenses related to Chapters 3 and IV, and by the appropriate government for other offenses. Source: chief inspector cum facilitator, appointed by the appropriate government to exercise powers of inspection and facilitation, may be appointed for a state, multiple states, or the entire country. Source: additional chief inspector cum facilitator, joint chief inspector cum facilitator, deputy chief inspector cum facilitator. Officers appointed by the appropriate government to assist the chief inspector cum facilitator and exercise specified powers within their jurisdiction. Source: competent authority, appointed by the state government to oversee specific aspects of the code within a defined area, often with qualifications in personnel management, HR development, industrial relations, and legal affairs. Source: designated authority, appointed by the central or state government for the purpose of granting or renewing licenses to contractors. Source: authority notified by the central government, responsible for the previous sanction of prosecutions related to Chapter 3 Employees Provident Fund and Chapter 4 Employee State Insurance Fund. Source: authority notified by the appropriate government, responsible for the previous sanction of prosecutions related to provisions other than Chapters 3 and IV. Source: Registrar of Trade Unions, Additional Registrar of Trade Unions, Joint Registrar of Trade Unions, Deputy Registrar of Trade Unions, officials involved in the registration and functions of trade unions. Source: National Industrial Tribunal, Judicial Member, Administrative Member, a forum for the adjudication of industrial disputes. Source: employers, entities that employ individuals and are subject to the provisions of the Social Security Code. Various types of establishments are mentioned, including factories, mines, plantations, banking companies, etc. Source: multiple PDFs. Employees, workers, individuals employed in various capacities and sectors, whose Social Security is the focus of the code. Numerous categories of workers are listed, e.g., skilled, unskilled, audiovisual worker, contract labor, bidi and cigar workers, mine workers, motor transport workers, building and other construction workers. Source: multiple PDFs. Contractors, entities that supply or engage contract labor and are required to obtain licenses under the code. Source: occupier, defined in relation to different types of establishments, factory, mine, etc., and is responsible for compliance with the code. Source: owner, in relation to a mine, defined as the immediate proprietor, lessee, or occupier of the mine, with specific exclusions. Source: manager, in relation to a mine, responsible for the statutory duties within a mine. Source: audiovisual worker, a category of worker with specific mention in relation to employment regulations and agreements. Source: dependents, family members of an employee, who may be eligible for certain benefits under the code. The definition of a dependent is provided. Source: nominee, a person nominated by an employee to receive benefits in certain circumstances. Source: trade union, an association of workers or employers for regulating the relations between workers and employers. Source: negotiating union or negotiating council, entities involved in negotiations related to industrial relations. Source: banking company, defined as per the Banking Regulation Act 1949, and includes various financial institutions. Source: Reserve Bank of India, RBI, mentioned in the context of advice or directions regarding reserves of banking companies. Source: Metro Railway, defined under the Metro Railways, Operation and Maintenance Act 2002, and falls under the purview of the central government as the appropriate government. This timeline and cast of characters provide a comprehensive overview of the main events and principal people mentioned within the provided excerpts related to the Social Security Code, 2020. Convert to text. Convert to source. Labor and Social Security Law Study Guide Quiz Instructions. Answer the following questions in 2.3 sentences each, based on the provided source materials. What is meant by the term accounting year as defined in the code? List 3 grounds on which a person can be disqualified from being a member of the board. According to Form V, what information is typically included in a wage slip? What are some examples of establishments for which the central government is considered the appropriate government? Define dock work as described in the provided excerpts. What are some of the entities that can run the medical education institutions and training institutes established by the corporation? What is the role of an inspector-cum-facilitator before initiating prosecution proceedings against an employer for certain offenses? Provide 2 examples of hazardous substances mentioned in the excerpts. According to the excerpts, what happens to licenses obtained under previous central labor laws after the commencement of the code? What are model standing orders, and what is their initial status in a new industrial establishment under the code? Quiz answer key. The accounting year in this code refers to the year that begins on the first day of April. This definition is important for financial record keeping and compliance under the legislation. A person can be disqualified from being a member of the board if they are declared to be of unsound mind by a competent court, if they are unknown, discharged insolvent, or if they have been convicted of an offense involving moral turpitude before or after the commencement of the code. A wage slip, as indicated in Form V, typically includes details such as the name of the establishment and address, the period for which the wages are being paid, the employee's name, their father's spouse's name, designation, UAN, and bank account number. Examples of establishments for which the central government is the appropriate government include establishments carried on by or under the authority of the central government, those concerning any centrally controlled industry, railways, including metro railways, mines, oil fields, major ports, air transport service, telecommunication service, banking companies established by a central act, central public sector undertakings, and their subsidiary companies. Dock work encompasses any work within or near a port that is connected with, required for, or incidental to the loading, unloading, movement, or storage of cargo to or from ships or other vessels, port areas, storage places, or landing places. It also includes work related to preparing ships for cargo operations or departure and certain repairing and maintenance processes. The medical education institutions and training institutes established by the corporation can be run by the corporation itself, or upon its request by the central government, any state government, public sector undertakings of the central or state government, or any other body notified by the central government. Before initiating prosecution for certain offenses related to Chapter 3, NIV, the inspector-cum-facilitator or notified officer must give the employer a written direction with a time period to comply with the relevant provisions. If the employer complies within this period, no prosecution will be initiated for that instance. Examples of hazardous substances mentioned in the excerpts include industrial gases like nitrogen, oxygen, and acetylene, as well as alkalis and acids. Any license obtained under a previous central labor law for a factory, industrial premises, for Beatty and cigar work, or for engaging contract labor before the commencement of this code is considered to have been obtained under the provisions of this code, and remains valid for its original duration, after which it needs to be renewed under the new code. Model standing orders are guidelines related to conditions of service and other connected matters that the central government shall create. When the relevant section of the code becomes applicable to an industrial establishment, these model standing orders are automatically considered adopted until the establishment's own standing orders are certified. Essay format questions discuss the significance of the definition of appropriate government in the context of labor and social security legislation. How does this definition impact the implementation and enforcement of the code across different types of establishments? Analyze the roles and responsibilities of the inspector-cum-facilitator under this code, particularly in relation to ensuring compliance and initiating prosecution. How does this role balance enforcement with providing opportunities for employers to rectify non-compliance? Examine the provisions related to disqualification for being a member of the board. What are the underlying principles behind these disqualifications, and how do they aim to ensure the integrity and effectiveness of the board? Based on the excerpts, discuss the scope and significance of licensing requirements for different types of establishments and activities, such as industrial premises for Beatty and cigar workers, and the engagement of contract labor. What are the objectives of these licensing provisions? Explore the concept of model standing orders and their role in governing the conditions of service in industrial establishments during the initial period after the Code's applicability. What is the purpose of this provision, and how does it facilitate a smooth transition under the new legal framework? Glossary of key terms. Accounting year. The year commencing on the first day of April, used for financial record keeping and compliance. Advisory Board refers to either the Central Advisory Board or a State Advisory Board, constituted under Section 42 of the Code. Appropriate Government. The government, central or state, that has jurisdiction over specific establishments or industries, as defined in the Code. This determines which government is responsible for implementing and enforcing certain provisions. Banking Company, defined as per Section 5 of the Banking Regulation Act, 1949, and includes various nationalized and private banks, as well as financial institutions like the Export-Import Bank of India and the Reserve Bank of India. Dock work. Any work in or near a port related to the loading, unloading, movement, or storage of cargo, as well as the preparation and maintenance of ships in port. Hazardous substance. Any substance or quantity of a substance whose chemical or physiochemical properties or handling can cause physical or health hazards to humans or harm to the environment. Industrial premises. Any place or premises, not a private dwelling, where industry, trade, business, occupation, or manufacturing is ordinarily carried on, with or without power, including attached godowns. Inspector cum facilitator. An officer appointed by the appropriate government to oversee compliance with the Code, with the initial responsibility of providing opportunities for employers to rectify non-compliance before initiating prosecution for certain offenses. Metro Railway, defined under the Metro Railways Operation and Maintenance Act, 2002. Mine, defined as per Clause J of subsection 1 of Section 2 of the Mines Act, 1952, encompassing various types of mining operations and related infrastructure. Model Standing Orders, standard guidelines relating to conditions of service and other connected matters issued by the central government, which are initially adopted by new industrial establishments until their own standing orders are certified. Notification, an official announcement published in the Official Gazette of India or the Official Gazette of a state. Occupier, in relation to a factory or other establishment, the person who has ultimate control over its affairs. Specific definitions exist for mines and ships under repair. Oil field has the meaning assigned to it in Clause E of Section 3 of the Oil Fields Regulation and Development Act, 1948. Plantation, land used for growing specific crops like tea, coffee, rubber, cinchona, or cardamom, meeting a certain size threshold, generally 5 hectares or more, or any land declared as such by the state government. Wage slip, a document, Form V, provided to an employee detailing their earnings for a specific period, including the establishment's and employees' information, wage period, and other relevant details. Frequently asked questions based on the provided sources. What is defined as an accounting year according to the provided legal text? An accounting year is defined as the year commencing on the first day of April. This definition is provided in the context of a specific legal code, as indicated in. What are some grounds for disqualification from being nominated or being a member of a board as per the legal documents? A person can be disqualified from being nominated as or being a member of the board if they are declared to be of unsound mind by a competent court, if they are an undischarged insolvent, or if they have been convicted of an offense involving moral turpitude, either before or after the commencement of the code. The decision of the central government is final in case any question arises regarding such disqualification, as stated in. What information is typically included in a wage slip as per the provided format? A wage slip, according to the format in, includes the date of issue, name and address of the establishment, the wage period, and details of the employee such as name, father spouse's name, designation, universal account number, UAN, and bank account number. It also contains information related to the wage period and potentially amounts paid or due. What categories of workers are listed under unskilled and semi-skilled classifications in the provided documents? The documents provide extensive lists of job titles categorized under unskilled and semi-skilled labor. Examples of unskilled workers include gangman, gatingman, permanent way, mazdor, and cleaner. Examples of semi-skilled workers include cook, helper, loco crane truck, bilchala, and assistant driller. These lists are not exhaustive but illustrate the types of roles classified under these skill levels. What is the significance of the appropriate government in the context of these legal documents, and how is it defined for different types of establishments? The appropriate government is a crucial term that determines which authority, central government or state government, has jurisdiction over specific establishments and matters related to the legal code, as defined in, and the central government is the appropriate authority for establishments carried on by or under its authority, excluding those specified otherwise. controlled industries specified by it, railways, including metro railways, mines, oil fields, major ports, air transport service, telecommunication service, banking or insurance companies established by a central act, central public sector undertakings, their subsidiaries, and autonomous bodies owned or controlled by the central government, including their contractors. For any other establishment, the state government is the appropriate government. What constitutes dock work as defined in the provided legal texts? Dock work is defined broadly in, and as any work in or within the vicinity of any port that is connected with, required for, or incidental to the loading, unloading, movement, or storage of cargoes into or from a ship or other vessel, port dock, storage place, or landing place. This includes work related to preparing ships for cargo operations or leaving port, as well as repairing and maintenance processes connected with holds, tanks, lifting machinery, or other storage areas on board ships or in docks. What are some of the purposes for which the Employees Provident Fund Organization, EPFO, can obtain loans, and from where? According to, the EPFO can obtain loans for the acquisition of land and/or the raising of buildings thereon, to repay a loan raised under the same sub-rule, or for any other purpose approved by the central government. These loans can be obtained from the central government or, with the central government's approval, from specified banks. What is the process for initiating prosecution against an employer for offenses under the discussed legal framework? Before initiating prosecution proceedings against an employer for any offense, the inspector-cum-facilitator or any other notified officer is required to give the employer an opportunity to comply with the relevant provisions by way of a written direction, which includes a time period for compliance. If the employer complies within this period, no prosecution will be initiated. However, this opportunity is not granted if a similar violation is repeated within 3 years of the first violation, in which case prosecution will proceed according to the law. Additionally, prosecution for offenses related to specific chapters 3 and IV requires the previous sanction of an authority notified by the central government, while for other provisions, the sanction of an authority notified by the appropriate government is needed.